50 different insane people in history. This is season 1 of this series cut into one video. Timestamps are in the description. I hope you enjoy this and look forward to season 2, where I will cover modern insane people. Enjoy and subscribe. We'll start with Vlado Dapcevic. He was a communist too radical for Yugoslavia.
Ja sam marksista-leninista I čitavoga života sam se borio za pobjedu ideje komunizma. Koliko sam znao, mogao I umio.
And now in the more silly stuff, I wouldn't say he's very interesting, but it's mostly his prison time that is quite well documented. He in total spent 24 years inside of a prison cell. He was quite an active young man. When he was 16, he became member of the Communist Youth and got arrested, became member of the Yugoslav Communist Party in 1934. In 1935, he spent time in jail for revolutionary activities. During massive communist protests in Montenegro in 1936, he was arrested again and spent 4 months in Sarajevo prison. And soon after he was released, he wanted to fly to Spain and become volunteer for the communists in Spain, but he was taken into questioning. He participated in the Battle of Pjevlja, where he was wounded. During the war, he was expelled from the party because of disagreement with the leadership, but he got readmitted because of the courage in the battlefield. He became the commander of the Yugoslav National Army Administration, in charge of agitation and propaganda. He tried to escape to Romania, together with 2 Montenegrin generals. One of the 2 generals were shot, and the other one was arrested. And he himself managed to escape to Belgrade and hid for a while, but he got arrested when trying to cross into Hungary. After 2 years in investigation prison, he was sentenced to 20 years in jail. One of the prisons being that Goli Otok thing that I showed previously. He was tortured to give up his communist views, but he never fully did. He escaped to Albania in 1958 and emigrated to the USSR. But he had clashes with the USSR because he tried to get Russians to volunteer in Cuba. So he was kind of kicked out in 1966, emigrated to Western Europe. He was arrested in France, in Belgium, in the Netherlands and Switzerland. When he was in Western Europe, he also tried to get in contact with Marxist-Leninist parties who supported the Soviets, and the Yugoslav Secret Service tried to kill him in 1973. The Secret Service, for example, kidnapped him, but the people who arrested him got shot. They broke my teeth, cut off my tongue, ripped up my throat, broke my ribs, and hurt all my internal organs. In the end, they put up some kind of bandana on my head and my nose. I completely lost consciousness. I woke up next evening in Belgrade Central Prison, in the basement cell. And Vlado also started in 1992, his own party in Yugoslavia, called Party of Labour, which still exists, but has 0 seats in the National Assembly.
Niti sam zločinac, ni terorista, čovjek koji je smatrao da treba na drugi način, politički drugi način, rješavati neke probleme u Jugoslaviji.
Gleb Bokii. Well, I've done a video about him before, so go check that out because I've done a lot of deep dives, but I'm just going to do the TLDR, the funny part, and a few of the stories I told in that video. Gleb invited shamans, mediums and other people into his research team of decryption to see if they can learn more, and he thought they learned more. He actually thought that by these people, which has an order tradition, they view things outside the box, we can learn how to decrypt language that's also outside the box. And he thought that worked quite well, so he continued doing that. After some time, actually, he had entire seminars where he was teaching people about occultist ideas and having weird shamans there teaching them occultic ideas. So many people hated it. They were bored out of their mind, but it's like, yeah, but this is how we crack the codes. This is how I, Gleb Bokii, crack the codes. This is why you need me. And the more this went on, the more he himself started to believe in the occult. He started to believe in, well, 2 different ideas, I should say. He was his main point of occultism. One was the harmony between sort of society, nature, and self. He believed that for the best human civilization, human development, we need harmony, full harmony. Think it is like the vril again, and like as we talked about the vril previously. The vril, it's if you have the harmony, you can then build up human morality and the rest, and sort of create the better people. if you have harmony. In a later time, his entire department turned into more or less occultism. He spent a lot of time being a bit of a womanizer, fucking a lot of department guys' wives, which happened for some reason. But also he spent a lot of time doing rituals of Tibetan tradition, or other sort of like Eastern tradition. What he defined as like Eastern traditions he tried to do. So they spent a lot of time in a dacha, doing rituals outside, being half naked or having sexual orgies, doing different things to get the energy necessary to do their work and sort of be connected with the Gartha. So in a sense, his entire department became occultism. It became Bolshevistic occultism. Just because he was really good at cracking codes. Yeah, but obviously this didn't last forever. Nothing really lasts forever. He got arrested during the purge and shot the same day he was trialed. Jean-François Thiriart. Reading up on this guy, he's a bit lost, I should say that. He's from a left-wing family. In the 1914s, he joined the Fichebund, which is a German National Socialistic propaganda organization, which made him support the National Socialists in Germany at the time, in which he would later collaborate with, joining the Waffen-SS. He spent time in jail because of this, and didn't become active again until the 60s, when Belgium, which he's from, let the Belgian Congo become independent. He saw this as a betrayal, because he wanted Belgium to have strong international presence and not decolonize. And because of this, he started to become active again, mostly focusing on the idea of pan-Europeanism. He did disavow fascism and National Socialism, but still having certain sympathies for it. He was very active in different pan-Europeanist movements, taking a lot of inspiration from Francis Bakayaki. And later in his life, he started to view communism as quite a good alternative because of how strong the nation is. So more and more having sympathies, and especially sympathies for Ceausescu in Romania, but also sympathies towards Stalinism. One can define him as a national Bolshevistic pan-Europeanist, and because of that he also got relations with Alexander Dugin and a few others. Now where do I begin with this man, Mr. Nihal Atsiz? The amount of times I've seen Turks with his profile picture, it's ridiculous. He's a Turkish ultranationalist, a pure pan-Turanist, anti-Muslim, anti-Arab, just pure tyrannic Turkish. Even though he himself was a Muslim, he didn't like the Arab Muslims. He opposed atheism, he condemned communism, and he defended the existence of God. He said morality is very important for society. Islam is a national religion of the Turks. He was also a very proud racist. He wrote that the Kipchak in Lithuania, which is the Tatars in Lithuania, and the Kyrgyz of the same blood and therefore Turks, but alien people living in Turkey like Jews are not Turks, even if they speak Turkish. He still has quite a large influence in Turkey for the moment, but any Turkish ultranationalist still likes him a lot. We are not Europeans, we are Asians, and we are cold as ice, and above all, we are Turks. Jörg Lanz von Liebensfeld. Now we're getting into very odd territories, but very interesting.
I, George Lanz von Liebensfeld, was born in Messina, Sicily, on May 1st, 1872. My father was Baron Johann Lanz de Liebensfeld.
Now, there's quite a lot of interesting things here. One, Adolf Hitler did take a lot of inspiration, but in the same time he also didn't like him. So he, as stated there, they tried to dismantle him, tried to remove him from history in a sense, because with this Austrian Volkism of Catholic order is not what we need our own. But for Lanz himself, he also found a lot of his ideas when he was part of a monastery, the Order of the Cistercians.
I was an idealist, an absolute fool, enticed by temptations, threatened by subhuman creatures. That's why I entered the monastery, not out of weakness, but out of my desire for purity. I chose the name of George. George, the Dragon Slayer. He hurls the dragon's brood aside. Apparently, I was after God's own wish. Because in the monastery, he showed me the picture of the dragon I had to kill.
He got a lot of these ideas when he looked at knights, something that absolutely fascinated him. And he viewed the angels as perfect being. The angels choosing the Aryan people to fight against the human animals, and that the angels had guided him to help the angel people and slay the dragon.
One of them attracted my attention with an almost electric force. It showed a heroic noble knight. His right hand points downward to a dragon-like creature. I wanted to know more about this gravestone. When that very night I had a dream in which I saw a Knight Templar.
So also it seems like August Strindberg, Sweden's most important novelist, had quite an effect on
Strindberg,
Franz.
a Swede, had moved to Austria in 1893 with his wife Frida Uhl. But within 2 years the marriage was over, and Lanz met him in 1896 when Strindberg went to stay with his daughter near Werfenstein. Werfenstein was destined to become the spiritual home of Lanz's self-styled Order of New Templars that later claimed Strindberg as a fellow traveller. Lanz was a fervent admirer of Strindberg's racist novella Chandala, published in German in 1894.
Alright, so I need to wrap this up a little bit. It's fascinating. Like, this guy is completely cuckoo. But Hitler read one of his magazines called Ostara for the blonde man, and with the concept of something called theosologia, which is the idea that there are different racial classes of the blonde man top and then the others in the bottom.
We will build Valhalla's future without the Pope, without the Jew. Heil.
Antonio Negri, a prominent Italian anti-authoritarian Marxist philosopher.
It is not true that we are free in this society. We are only free to get up every morning and go to work. The idea that work ennobles is a capitalist invention.
He's a bit of an Italian urban left-wing academic. In the 70s he was accused of assisting the Red Brigade, this being a Marxist-Leninist militant group in Italy during the years of lead in Italy, quite an awful time in Italy, which was involved in the murder of Aldo Moro, an Italian prime minister. And he got charged from this, even though the cases were dropped a little later.
Aldo Moro, the chairman of the Christian Democrats, is kidnapped and his bodyguards shot. The Red Brigades claim responsibility for the kidnapping. A military logic has prevailed, from which Negri distances himself.
Quello è stato il momento in cui tutti si sono resi conto, i compagni, diciamo così, della mia tradizione, dei miei gruppi, si sono tutti, quasi praticamente tutti, reso conto che eravamo davanti a una scadenza fatale, ecco, per così dire. E c'è stata quindi una grossissima pressione per il rilascio di Moro. Una grossissima pressione che passava attraverso canali che più o meno conoscevamo, cioè da un lato verso il Partito Socialista, perché il Partito Socialista, Craxi, era l'unico che voleva a tutti i costi che Moro fosse salvato.
Almost a year later, the state moves against the intellectual leaders of the Autonomia movement. On April 7, 1979, they are arrested. In the following years, 60,000 activists are investigated and 25,000 arrested. Special laws allow defendants to be held in jail for years. It is the first step of a massive retaliation by the state against the Italian left.
Quando mi trovo in prigione con 17 omicidi, e Moro compreso, vengo riconosciuto come qualcuno che aveva partecipato agli Afani, cioè non potevo aspettarmi che di essere accusato di essere il capo del movimento e delle Brigate Rosse.
And because in being a left-wing academic, a lot of the main guys like Michel Foucault commented on it, stating that he had nothing to do with that. Even Deleuze protested against his imprisonment. An academic falsely accused of left-wing terror. When it comes to his ideology, his biggest form is the idea against nation-state. It takes a few different interpretations in a few of his different books. It's, nation-state in relation to the capital. How is it, then, that Labour, with all its life-affirming potential, has become a means of capitalist discipline, exploitation, and domination in modern society. And one of the big books on this is Empire, which discusses imperialism in the form of nation-states. The rise of empire is the end of national conflict. The enemy now, whomever it is, can no longer be ideological or national. The enemy now must be understood as a kind of criminal, as someone who represents a threat not to a political system or a nation, but to the law. This is the enemy as a terrorist. The new order that envelops the entire space of civilization. Where conflict between nations has been made irrelevant, the enemy is simultaneously banalized. Or just TLDR, United States being a global empire, NATO being a global empire, or any future other nation-state empire.
Meanwhile, Empire, the book Negri co-authored with Michael Hart, is published in the United States. It becomes a world bestseller and is celebrated as the Communist Manifesto of the 21st century.
Beness Ajio. Now this person I actually wanted to cover also before, when I did my NASBOL video. Latvian-born black man who was a big part of the Russian National Bolshevist Party.
Здравствуйте, уважаемые товарищи! Внимание! СОС! Латвийская правящая хунта раскрутила зловещий маховик политических репрессий.
Yeah, this is a lolcow. It's just, I had no deep, he wrote the next Communist Manifesto of our time. No, this is nothing, it's a lolcow. Oh, yeah, so he's been part of the National Bolshevik Party since 1998. He's been in prison all over the place. He supported, obviously, the Russian annexation of Crimea and the Donbass. He's for an imperial Russia. His mother is Russian, his father's Ugandan. The Black Lenin here, he did small things. Smoke bomb when George W. Bush visited Latvia. Part of rallies in the Communist Party in Great Britain. He went to Palestine and did some activities against Israel. But overall, nothing. He was charged in a Latvian court for calling for the violent overthrow of the government. Since 2022, he's a Russian citizen. And his Latvian citizenship has been revoked. Okay, we're going from a lolcow to genuinely, not good. Yaki Achkröv. The way Yaki was brought up is sadly quite common nowadays, of people with mixed heritage. His mother is a Liberian woman, and his father was a 60-year-old Englishman. He never really met his father, and he was raised by his stepfather from the United States, named Joe. They only spent 1 year together until he got heavily sick and had to move to the United States. His mother decided to adopt away Jackie. Both of them came to Norway when they were 2. And a lot in Jackie's early childhood, he dreamed of moving to the United States to his stepfather, joining the American military. His new adopted family is in Sweden, up in Lapland, South Lapland. They owned a store, and he lived above the store that they owned. And very early, he had identity crisis on who he is. A lot of the moving, but mostly his mixed heritage, caused a lot of concerns. And because of that, he got a fascination of World War II and National Socialism. At the age of 17, he started military service, but got denied later on for further military education. And he tried to become part of the French Foreign Legion, but the French Foreign Legion didn't want him either. When he was 19 years old, he traveled to Zagreb to join the Yugoslav War and joined the Bosnian Croat army, because they were closer to the National Socialistic ideas that he had. Well, he committed quite a lot of war crimes. I will try to explain some of them here. He noted a lot of this down in his journals. On the 14th of July, our club's group went to the village of Rotmia, where both civilians and children were killed. For example, a 10-year-old boy named Adela Bukman and his 5-year-old brother, Adis. They went from village to village, burning down Muslim villages, throwing grenades into their homes. Important testimony given by Mildivia Cesar, at that point 22 years old and pregnant in her 3rd month, that Jackie would personally torture her between the 14th and 16th of July, calling her a whore, separating her from children and the rest, forced her on the ground, forcing her to say Allahu Akbar while he was pointing a gun in her mouth. He would kick her on her back, screaming, "Say it!" This brutal torture would damage her uterus and kill her child. He would scream, "Continue walking, you whore," threatening to cut off the child in the stomach with a knife. many times lighting cigarettes on her, forcing her to swallow lighted cigarettes while kicking and slapping her. Other times he would threaten some of the prisoners by pouring gasoline on them and saying that he would burn them alive. For this, he was charged by a Bosnian court for war crimes, in which he would spend 13 years in jail, but they managed to get it down to 8 years in jail, and then later on, the Red Cross did a prisoner exchange, bringing him back to Sweden.
Erkänner, men, och vad framstår jag då som? En människa utan egen vilja. En människa som inte kan ta eget beslut, som inte har några egna tankar. Då det gäller skuldfrågan så placerar jag mig själv i just det brotten jag har begått. Och även till och fått andra människor genom enbart att medverka och nicka, ja, till att också indirekt uppmuntra andra människor till brott genom att enbart medverka själv.
I understand what you think. With all what happened in Bosnia, can it get worse? Yes, it does. When he came back, he dealt with a lot of post-traumatic stress. Has panic attacks and problems sleeping, visions, he doesn't trust anybody. And this obviously leads to all types of provocation, pub fights and the rest. And he started to join neo-Nazi gatherings in Sweden, which would lead to the second crime that puts him life in jail. Oh well, he's soon out, but soon kinda life in jail.
25-åriga Jackie Arklöv finns nu på intensiven på Södersjukhuset i Stockholm.
Han har fått ett skott som har tagit sannolikt från ryggsidan strax ovanför midjan och som har gått tvärs igenom höger bröstkorgshalva och gått ut strax nedanför den högra bröstvårtan. Men om inga oförutsedda komplikationer inträffar så är den definitivt inte livshotande.
Jackie Arklöv was robbing a bank, which he managed to get 2.6 million crowns. But during the escape, they shot at police officers. 2 police officers were shot. One in the forehead and one in the neck. At a later time, Jackie Arklöv was shot, which he could be sent to the hospital and then arrested. 2nd February 2000, he got a lifetime sentence for armed robbery, murder, and attempt of murder. Alright, let's move on to the next person. This is a bit much. Let's talk about Corneliu Codreanu. Now, Codreanu, dear, how many times you guys have told me to cover this man and all the little minions he has under him. I do know every Romanian knows this man, and they either love him or hate him. He is the Archangel Michael of Romania. Codreanu is massive. So if you cover what's written on this thing here, the least obscure person, yeah, I mean, there's a lot to this man. I can talk about him for about an hour or two. A violent anti-Semite, anti-communist and terrorist since youth. I have noticed a bit of a pattern, in particular how this guy wrote this person here. I've noticed a bit of a pattern how he wrote down Codreanu, because everyone else is quite objective, even the cuckoo crazy people. It's like, he did that. This is a lot of his personal opinions coming through. This person do not like Codreanu. I mean, Codreanu comes from quite a large family with a lot of different opinions throughout his entire family, some more extreme than others. But I'm lacking to see how, from a young age, he was the most radical person. His charisma and his legacy that he's left behind and why people are so mixed is because it's not, you can't just point at him and say, this was needed to happen. He was so bad. He had a disdain for the more liberal government during his time. He did see them as traitors to the country. He wrote down a list on people who had betrayed the country, which also he wants removed, if you know what I mean with that. But nothing of that took ever form. He got arrested by his own comrades and put in trial. The other people who was part of this conspiracy also got either killed or jailed. Modeled religious practices from inspiration from Romanian Orthodox mysticism. He had a vision that he was speaking to God when he was 28 through he had a vision when he was 28. He was talking to God through an icon of Archangel Michael. That's why he named a lot of his movement into the Iron Cross. The Archangel Michael's Legion had to be What do you mean, had to be executed? Had to be executed by the gendarmerie while imprisoned in 1930? What do you mean, had to be? Huh? I'm sorry, but the last statement here is completely insane. The gendarmerie is sort of a paramilitary force in Romania. Their task is dealing with high-risk personnel. So they're sort of like an elite squad of police, one can say it. And they are under control of the Ministry of Internal Affairs. It states here, the 14 persons have been transported from their prisons and executed, strangled or garroted or shot by the gendarmerie around Tancabesti near Bucharest. And their bodies has been buried in the courtyard of Yilva prison. Their bodies were dissolved in acid and placed under 7 tons of concrete. That's what happened. They were just executed by them and then dissolved the bodies in acid. How is that? Had to be. Like that's a good thing that he was dissolved in acid. A big reason for the murder was because of Nazi Germany had now gained influence in Central Europe, and especially over Romania. And they didn't want the Iron Guard. They didn't view them as useful for the Nazi Germany's cause. So that's why they were killed and dissolved. Again, more or less what I pointed out earlier on, people are so mixed about Codreanu. Like, I can, again, if I wanted to do a short biography telling you who he is, it would take an hour, and he's, I would say, still one of the most important people in Romanian history, or modern Romanian history. I'm gonna leave it here. You might be disappointed I could cover more of it, but I think I can't. Valery Yemelyanov, or I should state it in Russian, Valery Yemelyanov. Yeah, but I always pronounce it wrong. I covered this guy before, and if you go to the Google, you search his name, my video comes up. I'm quite happy about that. So please check out the video. So for the people who do not know who Valery is, let's just say he's an ultra far-right person, and an extreme anti-Semite. The highest of highest anti-Semites. I don't think you can go beyond this point. Everything that is influenced by Judaism in any way is bad. This is why the neo-pagan revival focus on tradition and history away from anything to do with the Jews is very important. But if we talk more about what he created, well, up until a certain point in his life, he didn't do any political activism. He was obviously an anti-Semite, but never any political activism. He focused on Oriental studies. There's a weird correlation with Oriental study people in the people I talk about, and mostly just taught Arabic. When he was middle-aged, he created something called National Patriotic Front, or, in other words, Pamiat. Now this Pamiat, very influential. But a lot of activities these people did was quite bad. But here you can think of the far right of the far right. Which in other words, like National Bolshevism, neo-fascism, any sort of anti-Semitism you can imagine. And yes, Masons or Semites in that same regard. Communism is Semitic, so anything at all to do with Christ or Marx, gone. The weird part about Pamiat, it didn't grow that big, but influential it did. One of the members being Alexander Dugin. On the 6th day, you in the morning, take off your hat and prepare the flowers. Take them to 41, on a bloody slope, along Vladimirka, and nerves, clenched into a fist, strengthen the rebuff, the occupation of Sion that crawled like a snake in Russia by the hands of the Freemasons. Warm nest twisted, shot, trampled. Russia are the best ranks. I gave power to the puppeteers, sowing lies in every way. We will not see improvement. The bourse will flourish if we do not apply zeal, destroy Sion's army. He wrote a book called Decyanation. This book goes into detail about every single Jewish influence in Russian history, Scandinavian history, any sort of history. Let's read this poem. If you accept, Prince, the Christian way, to us in Russia, I say in advance, the churchmen will fly like crows. They will bring holy scripture. Although the scripture is called holy, it is difficult to find a more depraved book. It contains lies, filth, and shameful fornication, enmity, and brotherly betrayal. We'll get rid of their hallelujah that in a dream we will not see. They will sing in Russia, Isaiah rejoice. They will honor the Psalm of David, alien words. They will screech with an unlubricated cart, and the beauty will fade from them. Russia speaks knitted with silk. If grandfathers eat cranberries alone, their grandchildren will be the sore of their cheekbones. The churchmen will do a lot of troubles. They torment the people with splits. Brother will rise to brother and family to family, or fierce enmity between loved ones. Once again, strife will go across Russia, our most vile thief from the beginning. I do recommend checking the entire video out to go in detail on every aspect of that book as well. How they talk about how Solomon had a 50 generational plan, how Japan was influenced by the Jews and the rest. It goes into detail. So I will end this now. This will just be the first part, and the second part will be out as soon as I'm done with it. Alright, take care. I'm alright. Regardless of that, she is the founder of the Japanese Red Army, which is similar in ways to the Red Army faction in Germany, of Ulrike Meinhof. They were most active in the 70s and the 80s, operating mostly in the Middle East, but the plan is to overthrow the Japanese government and the monarchy. But before she created the Japanese Red Army, she did join the Red Army faction in Japan, but the Red Army faction in Japan split off and created Japanese Red Army and the United Red Army. And same thing with any Red Army faction, they are a neo-Maoist one, focusing mostly on guerrilla warfare. The idea is to create a cost for capitalism, sort of make it so costly to have a capitalistic system so it will implode upon itself, creating the opportunity of creating a communist state after the failure of the capitalistic state. Fusako is still alive today. She's 80 years old, born 1945. She dedicated her entire life with the idea of this. For example, when the split-off happened, she started working in Tokyo's hostess clubs because of her immense beauty. And all the money she made there she put directly into the Japanese Red Army. The split that occurred has a lot to do with how they viewed the Japanese New Left and how they didn't really want to focus on a path to world revolution. That's why later they start joining up with Palestinian causes or different liberation movements in the Middle East, because there she would find opportunities for a world revolution. Arab media has covered her pretty decently. I'll give some quick tidbits of what she was doing in the Middle East. She started working for the Al-Hadaf magazine, where she will be able to explain to the Japanese people about the Palestinian cause and the struggle they're facing. The Japanese Red Army in the Middle East was part of a machine gun and grenade attack in the international airport near Tel Aviv, killing 28 people, and 2 of the terrorists were killed. Because of this event, she was brought underground. There were claims that the Israeli government was trying to assassinate her. At this point, she was pregnant with her daughter, who was born in 1973, and she lived underground for 28 years after that. She conducted several operations against capitalistic imperialistic entities, such as Shell in Singapore, the French embassy in The Hague, and the US consulate in Kuala Lumpur. She was arrested in Osaka in the year 2000. She was charged with 2 counts, one of passport forgery and one of planning the 1974 hostage-taking operation in the French embassy in The Hague. She got sentenced for 20 years in jail, and the group dissolved. Vladimir Dvornikovic. Who cares about this man? All my Yugoslav umfis be like, yippee, Yugoslavia, I love Yugoslavia, more Yugoslavia. I mean, who is this man? He's a very strong proponent of Yugoslav ethnicity. How is he comparable to like a mass murderer like other people in this damn list? I want these men on list because I love Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia #1. To not leave you completely empty-handed, I guess, he wrote the book Karetologa Yugoslavinia, Characterology of the Yugoslavs. He more or less wanted to create a unified ethos of the Southern Slavs of the Yugoslavs by comparing them to the generic race. It's more or less clumping all the Southern Slavs into one racial group or racial characteristic. Rudolf Steiner. For people unaware, this is the biggest person in this entire 20 list of people. I can talk about him for hours on the influence he had, his crazy theories. So I'm gonna pick just a few different things that I find interesting about Rudolf Steiner and discuss that.
We can no longer look in retrospect, in memory, at our youth, at our childhood, the way people once looked at their youth and childhood. Anyone who has carried out a certain inner biographical research can definitely say this. When we look back in this way, what is it that does not arise from this childhood, from this youth? What is missing is something that fills us with joy, with enthusiasm, with initiative. Something that gives us strength from a time we have lost outwardly, but which could be within us, fueling us inwardly, strengthening us within. This is expressed radically, but in a certain sense it is the case. As adults of our age, we have largely lost our youth, our childhood. And this is particularly evident in the fact that, if we now take a closer look at social life, as adults we find it so difficult to come to terms with young people.
This is an excerpt from his book, Becoming Fully Human. I listened to the audiobook of this about a year ago to sort of understand parts of Rudolf Steiner's concepts. Not the mystical, Gnostic, theosophical, whatever, but more his everyday philosophy. Now, I strongly disagree with this, but a lot of people don't. For a lot of people, this is truth. The idea of this is called anthroposophy. The idea is we are smarter as a human, we're more connected to our humanity when we are a child. So allow children to be children. And as an adult, do not lose the connection to your childhood. And some of the listeners might have been in certain schools called Waldorf schools. And the idea is to allow kids to play, to have fun, to explore. It's much more open. It's not very strict curriculum. They have to learn, obviously, certain aspects. But it's very popular for more open-minded individuals, if I say that. In the world, there's 1,200 schools of Waldorf and over 2,000 kindergartens. This is very popular. And I've even had arguments at random when people tell me how smart the kids are, how more honest kids are, how more connected to reality kids are than adults. And I always go, whoa, calm down there, Mr. Rudolf Steiner. That's silly. The idea is, with all the rules and social norms that exist in society, we are trapped. We can't open up spiritually to the world and be what we fully are. Dimitrije Mitrinovic. If you're any type of Serb nationalist, you know this man. Also, just to point out, I was trying to understand the pronunciation, and Google Translate asked if he was Bosnian. So true. And if I say to you that I interacted with this man before, that's also something crazy. That's true. And who knows, I might be sent to the damn Revolver magazine in Russia again if I talk about this man. So Dimitrije was a Serbian futurist. He traveled a bit all over the world, wrote for different magazines and papers, was part of a movement called Young Bosnians. He wrote a Serbian Futurist Manifesto. He was put in the Serbian embassy in the UK. And yeah, I mean, there's not much really more to him. He's like a cuckoo crazy Yugoslav futurist. Enjoyable. As I thought I was done with this man, I find an article calling him an unrecognized prophet of a united Europe and mankind. What are these Yugoslavs smoking, bro? His most influential initiative was the New Britain movement in the 1930s. One of the followers of that period was Alan Watts. The first was the concept of a social credit explained by Major Douglas. The second was a guild socialism with workers as stockholders in the company employing them. The third was the application of Rudolf Steiner's concept of the threefold state, which would include three assemblies: political, economic, and cultural. And the fourth was the campaign for an intermediate federation of all nations of Europe. When Hitler came to power, Dmitri wanted to stop him. The New Britain movement invoked the government of England and France to use force, if necessary, to prevent his refortification of the Rhineland in defiance of the Treaty of Versailles, and it would have worked. Yukio Mishima. What can I say that hasn't been said about Mishima thousands of times? I mean, PewDiePie has talked about Mishima. A Japanese ultranationalist who tried to do a coup d'etat and failed and committed seppuku. And he's an amazing Japanese writer. Shall we read Sun and Steel then? Refusing utterly to recognize the conditions of my own existence, I've set about acquiring a different existence instead. Insofar as words, by endorsing my existence, had laid down the conditions for that existence. The steps it was necessary to take to acquire another existence involve flinging myself bodily on the side of the phantom evoked and radiated by words. It meant changing from a being that created words to one that created by words. It meant, quite simply, using subtle and elaborate procedures in order to secure the momentary shadow of existence. It was logical indeed that I should have succeeded in existing only at one solitary, selected moment of my short army life. The basis of my happiness obviously laid in my having transformed myself, albeit for only a moment, into a phantom formed by the shadow cast by fat-off, mouldering words from the past. By now, though, it was not words that endures my existence, this type of existence that derived from rejecting the endorsements of existing by words had to be endured by something different. That something different was muscles. Muscles! Page 87. How I longed for this, how intensely I've looked forward to this moment. Behind me lays nothing but the familiar. Before me lays the unknown. The present moment was the thinnest of razor blades between two states. How impatiently I had waited to fulfilling this moment. How I've yearned for it to come under conditions as strict and alloyed as possible. It was for this, surely, that I was alive. How could I fail to feel affection for those whose kindness had made this possible? And that is Mishima. Jan Wacław Machajski, a Polish Pol Pot. Now, I gotta say, this person's very interesting. The reason for the Pol Pot commentary is because he's very anti-intellectual. He himself, an absolute genius. He just sucks up books like knowledge in his head. He defines himself more as a Jacobin more than anything else. He started his younger career with the Polish Socialist Democratic Party of Galicia, after illegally transporting himself to Galicia. Tried working with the powers that be until he got arrested and sent up to Siberia. And at the time of his exile, he took any book that he could with his friends nearby and just ate up all theory he possibly could eat up. And reframed something very differently, wrote different books even in exile that was spread throughout Poland. The earlier book is called The Intellectual Worker, which is a commentary on the intelligentsia in Poland or in the world, in the workers' movement. And mostly a commentary against Edward Bernstein, which is a German social democrat, and someone named Sturuv. In the text he noted the role of the intelligentsia in workers' movements. Thanks to his publication, people found out where he was imprisoned and paid his bail, which is 500 rubles, to get him released in 1901. To summarize his ideas, because I can go in a bit on this one, it's actually very interesting what he's bringing up, is the shared goal that both the worker and the intelligentsia have towards this sort of Marxist end goal, but that in a sense they're actively working against each other, especially intelligentsia and the working class, because he views a lot of the intelligentsia as sort of semi-bourgeois, part of the same cultural elite that exists in the capitalistic society that is inherently also pushing down the working class, with the concept that the working class isn't intelligent, isn't capable of learning. So a lot of the white-collar workers are getting paid more because of their sort of cultural belief that they are smarter and more capable than the worker, more important than a person working in a factory. So the exploitation is very different depending. They're both important and shouldn't be completely removed. Intelligentsia should have an important role, but not in the same magical, dreamy version. And they should be paid exactly the same and have the same status as a factory worker. Because in a sense, they're already taking advantage of the laborer's work by the food that they bring in, clothing, the housing that is done by other people's labor so they can write. Jun Ysuji. Jun is another very fascinating character. I might do something larger with this guy also in the future. He's a vagabond, he's a materialist, he's an egoist. The way I describe him is from what I've read and see. He's a man of simple living, with the hardship of childhood decided to go into the readings to a different world, but then seeing that life doesn't have to be that complicated. You can live in the material quite simply. Focus on the world around you, be Be content with things around you. Write not for the money, but for the expression. Be one with your ego. He is the first Dadaist translating a lot of works into Japanese, but spending a lot of time with Japanese feminism. Jun Ysuji, if he saw himself living in the Soviet Union, he would most likely have been shot to death. In his 50s, he spent some time in a psychiatric hospital because of the Tengu incident. Jun Ysuji climbed to the second-floor window and began flapping his arm, crying, "I am the Tengu!" Eventually jumping from the building, running around and jumping onto the table, calling, "Kia! Kia!" But it was in the end part of World War II, where the vagabond lifestyle was no longer really possible. A friend set him up in a one-room apartment in Tokyo, and he died in there of starvation. Italian Unabomber. He has no politics. There's no political motivations behind any of his attacks. There's about 30 different explosive devices that were attributed to him and multiple explosions. No one died, luckily. 17 people have been injured. There really is no connection between Ted Kaczynski Unabomber and Italian Unabomber. A little bit for that name, I don't really know, but someone made a joke and called him Munabomber, which means pussy bomber. Yeah, more or less a vagina bomber, which is just, no one really liked that name, so they just went with Unabomber because of the similarities of like packaging and the way explosions work between Ted Kaczynski and the Italian Unabomber. Guillaume Apollinaire. Some of you might recognize him with this photo. The creator of surrealism. Okay, if you know me, then you know that I do not agree upon that statement. I will say he is within the formation of Cubism and part of the spreading of Cubism more than what became of Surrealism. But sure, he coined the word. Here I am first of all a man full of sense, knowing life and of death, having proved the joys and the sorrows of love, having sometimes known how to impose his ideas, knowing several tongues, being pretty well travelled, having looked at the war from the infantry and the artillery, shot in the head trepanned under ether, having lost his best friend in the frightful fight. I know as much of the old and the new as one man alone could learn. And today, without getting upset at this war, yes, between ourselves, for ourselves, my friend, I judge that long wrangle to be one of tradition and change, of adventure and order. You whose mouth is made of the image of gods, mouth that the order itself, be indulgent when you compare to those who has been the perfection of order, us who know everything seek for adventure. We aren't your enemies. We want to give you dominations vast and strange, where the flower's enigma yields to whatever will pick it. There are brand new flares and colors unseen, 1,000 phantomas imponderable. That's a poem by him called The Pretty Redhead. Reading more and seeing when he coined the term surrealism in 1917. If you remember correctly, the stories of Jacques Vachet, as I mentioned it, he started exploring these concepts already in 1916, 1917. I know what you mean. Oh, you can go into more detail on this and this. This is so interesting. No. I have a personal gripe. Mr. Apollinaire, for example, wrote the book called The Exploits of a Young Don Juan and Irene, which is written in 1911. My mother was in her petticoat and I hitched it up past her knees so she could so she could cut her toenails more easily. This gave me a look of her pretty, plump feet, her fine muscular calves and her round, white knees. The sight of my mother's legs had affected my virility as much as my aunt's fondling had done. My mother probably realized this immediately, for she blushed and let down her petticoat. The lady smiled, and Kate began laughing until stopped by disapproving glances from my mother and my aunt. But she tried to excuse her behavior by saying, Bertie laughed too. When I reached that place with the warm sponge, my mother, though, ordered her to hold her tongue. At that very moment, the bathroom door opened, and Elizabeth, my older sister, entered. She was 15 and went to high school. Although my aunt swiftly flung a shirt over my bare body, Elizabeth had time to see me, and that bothered me considerably. For though I was not in the least embarrassed in front of Bertie, I did not want to be stark naked by Elizabeth. This is so retarded. So yes, so yes, he's a pervert. Oh no. I should also point out a very, very funny thing. He was in defense of Dreyfus. Why? Me, the perverted Apollinaire, had to defend Dreyfus. He's not a German spy, everybody. Alright, I gotta move on. I can't take this serious. Nick Land. Now, we're gonna have fun with this guy too, but I want to point out before I really go on and tell you what is so special about him. Nick Land is actually my Umfi. Yes, he's my Twitter Umfi. He did lose access to this account, but he has created a new one. But still, he has been my Umfi. Well, his old account is my Umfi. And the reason for that being the most popular video I made of Maria the Witch. Yeah, it's sad it's so popular, but it is what it is. He followed that entire drama. And whenever I talked about it, because sometimes that story got viral again, I saw him like, oh, here we go again. And it's like, Nick Land, like, it's just like, Nicholas, what the hell? He has been more active as of late, going on different discussions and debates, which is very fascinating. Tucker Carlson even talked about one of his concepts, and I don't understand it. I will not talk about it. If I do a longer video, I might talk about it, but I need to understand it first. I have noticed that he doesn't really understand that people are completely misusing his terminology. So that's kind of what I'm going to talk about here. There's a lot to him, but I'm going to talk about one concept in particular. Well, two concepts I really like, I should say. His most popular book, or collection of texts, I should say, is Fanged Noumena. The doctor's face seems to swim in and out of focus. You see the pores on his skin, scrupulous arrays, and then suddenly, without the solve, crossing the threshold, filmy cut, a circle of homogeneous flesh tone, nostril seals against the deluge, eyes shut and switched off forever, lips, teeth, tongue migrating downwards, out of shot, the disc receding at speeds towards a point of disappearance, in the center of the screen, the old reality is closing down, passing through mathematical punctuality. The dot wings out in pixel death. We apologize for the loss of signal. There seems to be a transmission problem. We are unable to restore the home movie. You were 3 years old, wearing a cowboy hat, standing in the paddle pool, Mommy and Daddy smiling proudly, but your parents have been vaporized into a dot pattern. Shapes and colors collapse into digital coding. We have come to the end of the series, and there will be no repeats of Daddy the doctor and Mommy the nurse. There has been a terrorist incident in the film's archive. The Western Civilization show has been discontinued. Hundreds of gigabytes. God Daddy the unit. Death Mommy the zero. Stink of excrement and burned celluloid. You must remember, one scrambling at zero like a dog. It's the primal scene. You are warned not to play with the switches. Now schizophrenia has adjusted your set. Flies crawls out of the eye socket of black babies breeding the dot patterns. And for your special entertainment, we have turned you into a TV-guided bomb. Daddy is a North American Aerospace Corporation. Mommy is an air raid shelter. Parts melt in an orgasm. Baby fat burns. Conception. You're minus 9 months and counting. Don't be scared. Take 20 billion years. Universal history is on the screen. Big Bang is to be redesigned. Hydrogen fuses under the arc light. The camera angle can be improved. Outside the studio, schizophrenics drifting green and black. You feel that you've been here before. 11:35 on a beautiful capitalist evening. Runway neon. Traffic of sex and marijuana. Your death window is rushing up. Almost time for you to climb into the script. Which, when you're inside, is remembering where you came in. We're afraid it's impossible to take you live to the impact site. This report comes from beyond the electromagnetic spectrum. If you climb out through the electrodes, the oxygen mask will descend automatically. Please extinguish all smoking materials. Deposit syringes in the tray provided. There will be a slight jolt as we cross over. Thank you for flying with transnational commodification, which will shortly be arriving in Mayhem. If there's anybody on board who can impersonate a pilot, it will be of comfort for the other passengers. To understand what we just read, you have to understand the concept of what he talks about in the sense of accelerationism that is mostly being misunderstood. It is the delusion theory of deterritorialization. Weird concept. But it's the idea that territories, which is a social interaction, social relation between one another, will be altered, mutated, or destroyed. Okay. So, see it as that. Social interaction or relations of social relationships. So, any interaction in society is larger than interaction within the body, the nation itself. Right? So, a misunderstanding of accelerationism is just taking the deterritorialization and not looking at the other aspect talked about, which is like, oh, I vote for Joe Biden because he's the accelerationist point of view. He brings destruction. He brings destruction of the state body. The body will come into play later. The state body. But that's a misuse of it. And we have other people a little bit more. One of the things that Nick Land had to learn recently, that people are using the word accelerationism in a satanic T-word, by thinking like, oh, if I bomb a school or shoot up a school or any of that, that would lead to accelerationism, which would lead to the destruction of society. But that's not what is being stated. It is the changing of social relationships that this does. And then you can talk about the body. This is the delusion concept, the body and organs. If you take the organs, which is the inner working of your body, that is what is technically being removed with deterritorialization. The body's internal organs, so internal relationships are being removed by deterritorialization. And that is sort of what you have to bring forth in accelerationism, is the destruction of these social interactions that is slowly happening over time, regardless of what you want it to actually do. This is nothing you can't change. It is slowly killing itself. Atomization, individualism, all this sort of destroying, but it's not replacing anything. And more by organ failure, more or less, that is how the body dies. The body doesn't die by you forcing the body in stress, but it does die with the organs being removed, by these interactions being removed. An interaction can be, as you saw in this poem you just wrote, that kind of explained most of this. It's the social interaction here with the child is him watching a DVD that his father probably made him about his childhood memory. Watching him as playing with his mother and father. And then over time, that DVD breaking just because he overused it. Returning into static, into not a singularity, which is the data collapsing upon itself in a broken state. Then, and that's an organ dying in your body, that's a liver failure. That social interaction is dead and can no longer be replaced. Your childhood is gone. That romantic idea of Western civilization of sorts of your childhood is gone. It died with that DVD burning down. And soon you will have a body without organs. Now, I might have misunderstood some aspects of this, but this is kind of how I view it. Now, these social relations or social interaction can be very minuscule, but it's still part of your the internal organs of your body, of the state, of the nation, of the world, of Western civilization. That's your organs, and they're slowly dying out. And once they die out, they turn into a blob, meaning you die, the body dies. And the body dies, it's no longer about the organs, it will mulch into itself. You put it into the grave and it will be eaten by larvae and it will mulch into energy. And then later, in the destruction of the universe, back into a singularity. That is the end goal of entropy. That's the end goal of life itself, if you don't believe in God. But that's the end goal of the materialistic world. returning back to singularity. But one concept I really like with Nick Land is the concept of an eternal sovereign. Like, Nick talks a lot about the issue of sovereignty. And the issue of a sovereign is that the sovereign dies, meaning it needs to be constant changing happening to fit that sovereign. But what will fix it is an internal sovereign. And he talks about, well, machine being the sovereign in the future, I guess, in one sense. But isn't the eternal sovereign Jesus Christ of Nazareth? Logos? Think about it. Howard Scott, a form of far left transhumanism, focus on the striving of technology to ensure that man no longer have to labor and can get the abundance that technology will give to us.
You would finally arrive at the point where you would not require the services of the majority of the able-bodied adults in the United States to produce and distribute the physical wealth. It would be done by a minority.
The concept of technocracy that Mr. Scott here is stating, it's a different form that hasn't really existed, but it's sort of focused on high intelligence, the intelligentsia getting control of everything and controlling it. Sort of what we're seeing today with Peter Thiel and Elon Musk. Sort of give this to the AI bros, the tech bros, to rule the world, because the tech bros knows best. This is exactly what this is, but then in the form of far left. But it's a system of letting society be run by technical experts, because they are more wise, productive, and rational. Technocracy is the science of social engineering, the scientific operation of the entire social mechanism to produce and distribute goods and services to the entire population of this continent. For the first time in human history, it will be done as a scientific, technical, and engineering problem. There is no place for politics and politicians, finance and financiers, rackets and racketeers. The technate will encompass the entire American continent, from Panama to the North Pole, because natural resources and the natural boundary of this area make it an independent, self-sustaining geographical unit.
What did you think of the reactions of the bankers and the people who became very interested in the
Well, that was typical, you see. They didn't know what it was, and the press broke it.
Yeah.
Well, then they went for it. Well, then when they discovered that it was really radical and revolutionary. In other words, we considered communism so far to the right that it's bourgeois. What we were designing was something far more revolutionary than socialism or communism.
Pedro Durruti. What the hell has happened to this man? Now, the interesting aspect, as stated here, this dude is just a bit of a loser. His brother is the famous one. Buenaventura Durruti, the leader of the Spanish anarchists. Oh, but Pedro, the brother, he was like, I have to join you, brother. I will become a leader of your anarchist federation. And then he got arrested, but put into Madrid, and he said, wait a minute, you're kinda stinky. I'm gonna join the Falang, and I'm gonna find a merger between anarchism and phalangelism. And I'm gonna organize the phalange into my view, my way of doing things. So what I have to do is I will contact José Antonio Primo de Rivera.
Una fe resuelta.
And I will get him in contact with my brother, and they will talk, and we will unite the ideas of anarchism and phalangelism and win this war. But then he had another idea. What if I overthrow Francisco Franco, take control over the phalange myself, and then I can find a way to unite the ideas of anarchism and phalangelism? What a great idea, he said that until it was put to the wall and shot. What the Okay. Franco Freda. So, okay, some of you might know this, some of you might contact me after this, but Franco Freda right now is getting popular again, thanks to SALT. Let's talk about who this man is. The big reason why this is getting renewed now is because people don't know what happened in Italy in the 70s. But it was a year of lead. I'm seeing that most videos talking about this concept is being flagged, so I'm gonna talk about it very quickly here. A lot of this happened because of Operation Gladio. It's the CIA going in, investing in dismantling of left-wing militia groups by backing either right-wing or government institutions to remove these. So in Italy, they created the far-right organizations, which were technically just third-positionist or sort of national Bolshevistic concepts, so communistic, because Italy and communism, fascism and communism goes hand in hand. They're very similar. A lot of the communists took inspirations from Mussolini, so it's very hard to separate the two. So creating these groups to fight each other is intermingling the same concepts with one another, making it a very confusing mess. Franco Freda was one of the biggest messes of it, mixing Maoism, or neo-Maoism, was very popular with the left, with far-right concepts. Madame Blavatsky, or Helena Blavatsky, she's one of the most influential people in the 1800s. Everything that is in any way sort of mystic, esoteric, occultic, different from the norm is her. As we talked about many times before, real, her. All of these different radical political ideas, her. Neo-paganism, her. Satanism, her. Like, no joke, I think every single person on these lists inspired by her. The reason why you have, you see weird neo-Nazi skin, her. You see esoteric, her. Or you believe in your INTP, her. The thing is, we live in a world pretty much fully created by her. Now, obviously, she didn't create many of these ideas, but she brought them in, reformed them, made them readable, made them understandable, spread it, and every single person, one way or another, is inspired by her and the people who follow her. Now we'll go to a bit of a normal person, I should say, normal in comparison to many of the others. Charles Maurras is one of the most influential French people in the 1900s. He's a right-wing Catholic nationalist or integralist, creating a philosophy of Action Française. The funny tidbit, Action Française was also an anti-Dreyfus organization. And if you wonder who Dreyfus is, it's a person who gave up information to the German, completely splitting the Third Republic with pro- and anti-Dreyfus organizations. And the Dreyfus affair has a lot of influence in France, and even in modern time. If you ever seen Eileen in Seinfeld, yeah, she's a direct descendant of Dreyfus. What's wrong with this airplane food? That's not what he's saying. What's wrong with the Third Republic? Because of that, Maurras was still very influential. And he was very much against any sort of communism and socialism. It was growing in France. He wrote death threats towards Leon Blum. That's why he went to prison. Pope Pius XI wrote to him. But during World War II, he did support Vichy France because he believed the Free France was a Soviet-backed organization. And he still believed in a sort of strong national identity and free of communist influence that you're willing to partake with another enemy. But far-right, monarchistic, nationalistic, integralistic French politician. Very influential and fun. Because of the horrible time restraint, I am skipping Horia Sima. I know, every single Romanian be like, I want to hear about Sima. Last time you guys screamed about Ceausescu, and I'm not. You want me to cover Sima without half of the comment section being Romanian seething? I can't. I'm skipping this because it's too much and too boring. I want to get to the fun. Like, Horia Sima was an irrelevant loser that came in and became leader of the legionnaires because they themselves were cretins. Antonescu then, or Horia Sima. So let's move on, shall we? These are fun ones. I'm going to get to them. Herman Wirth. I was thinking of skipping him first, but then I looked more information about him. Isn't that much, man? He's a bit of a hippie. He did create a weird organization that Heinrich Himmler in particular really found interesting because I gotta find these proper Aryan race, quote unquote. But he just seemed like such a hippie. The guy believed that the origin of the European race comes from Atlantis. As I pointed out before, everything is her. Same thing here. Atlantis and all this, it's Blavatsky. So he wanted to find and explore North America and Europe to try to find this origin of Atlantis. And he used the funding of the SS to do these adventures, but it didn't last very long and he got kicked out. he sort of got more romanticized after the fact, especially Serrano in Chile and Alexander Dugin. Esoteric sort of theosophy, hippie? That's sort of what I'm getting from this. Walter Benjamin. Again, incredibly influential in many ways. The thing is, I didn't know who he was just from the name in this weird Wojak. But when I show you the picture of him, you know exactly who I'm talking about. He's a German who was part of the Frankfurt School, mixed in German idealism, Jewish mysticism, Western Marxism, and post-Kantianism. And this is how he looks like. And if you're anything like me, you go, oh yeah, this guy. Because names is impossible, but faces is like, oh, so recognizable. We had relations from everyone in Frankfurt School, obviously, Max Horkheimer and Theodor Adorno, but also Hannah Arendt and the person who Hannah Arendt slept with, Heidegger. But most of his popular things is obviously media critiques from a Jewish lens. The final paragraph about the Jewish quest for the Messiah provides a final point to Benjamin's work, with the theme of cultural destruction, Jewish heritage, and the fight between humanity and nihilism. He brings up the interdiction in some varieties of Judaism of attempting to determine the year when the Messiah would come to the world, and point out that this did not make Jews indifferent to the future, because every second of time was a straight gate towards which the Messiah might enter. And from a Kabbalic conception of history, in the concept of history, Benjamin also turned to Jewish mysticism for a model of praxis in dark times, inspired by Kabbalic perception that the work of the holy man is actively known as tikkun. According to Kabbalah, God's attributes were once held in vessels whose glass was contaminated by the pressures of evil, and these vessels have constantly shattered, disseminating their content to the four corners of the earth. Tikkun was a process of collecting the scattered fragments in the hopes of one day, in the hopes for once more piecing them together. Benjamin fused tikkun with the surrealist notion that liberation would come through releasing repressed collective material, to produce his celebrated account of the revolutionary historiographer who sought to grab hold of edible memories as they sparked to view at moments of present danger. And this concept of this history, especially the last part of memories, it's something I've worked upon a lot in my academic work in the past as well. It's a very interesting concept, a very Jewish concept of bringing up memories and collective memories and grasping onto memories to create the real from the memory bank. Actually goes into Toyen's concepts on the surreal to reimagine memory to create a new world. Very interesting concepts. Wilhelm Reich, a person I've actually covered before, so this will make it a bit easier. Part of psychoanalysis, focusing a lot on how sex and self-pleasuring can liberate you. What made him a little bit extra kooky and what a lot of people find interesting is the concept of orgone energy or sexual energy. Or in another word that many people use it today, vril.
Orgone energy, as Dr. Reich discovered, was synonymous with life energy, long postulated by scientists and accepted as fact by ordinary people from around the world. Orgone energy could be gathered in its free form directly from the atmosphere using a device he later called the orgone energy accumulator. A simple enclosure resembling a large hollow capacitor, composed of alternating layers of special insulators and conductors. The orgone accumulator allowed a high charge of the orgone to collect inside itself, facilitating its direct study and revealing many of its properties.
But most likely it was a concept of jacking it. I had a therapy session, for example, and it was a female and she was having issues with either God or her father or something. And the advice was to jack it. You have problems? Jack it. Rub it, or jack it, rub it, come. And it will solve all your issue. More or less it will numb you. That's the point. It will numb you and you will not care. You will fall out in favor of your father. You will not see God anymore. Doesn't matter, just jack it. And the last one I have energy to do, Philip Mainlander. This is how I feel right now. I hear in the sea, stirring wildly the deep, supplication of the approaching waves roaring, and the crack of the surf hitting the wave. raising the foam up to the clouds. I sink into comfortable daydreams, and my thoughts are released far, far away towards my beloved homeland, studded with stars and forests. So it's a thought I'm sitting, like a child, my arms tightly wrapped around my sister, during Sunday at our Limewood home, calm in my heart and golden peace. He's one of the most radical pessimists ever to be. Died in the age of 34, and now an enchanting life began, a spiritual blossoming full of bliss and blissful shiver. This life lasted 4 full months. It filled June, July, August, and September. Completely clear, consistent, and well-rounded was my system in my mind, and the creative frenzy revived me that I did not need a whip of the thought that I must be finished by 28th of September, for on 1st of October I had to put on the king's coat. This date could not be postponed. If I hadn't finished by then, it would take 3 years for me to finish touching on my work. I.e., I have seen myself thrown into an abyss into which the furies of the broken existence would inevitably have thrown me. He recognized death as salvation, and by giving nothingness an absolute quality, the eye can no longer stand the fields of death, which in black girded the tremulous crater. It stirred a fire that bubbles down in the bosom of the earth. Instead of desolation, it seeks for brighter pictures. It wanders by the sea, quote Quitsana, with the Angelo deep in the clouds, bathes his powerful forehead. Passed through Sorrento, through Cape Mainvey, towards the wild Capri, which bathes the wave, passing through the magnificent Minso, up to Shia and its high mountain. The sun touches jagged peaks and smooth celestial ocean. Everything tenses up, and in the avid wait of the last kiss of the astral queen complacent. At last with lust she gives in, red hot, what a picture, as if countless numerous rosebuds had suddenly awakened, so shines the coast in sparse purple, while a deep blue dye with living sea. But the message of the night dispels the magic. Bold violets emerges everywhere, catching the proud flowers die, bleed dry, and she approaches, expending her dark shadows more and more, carrying the golden sickle in her hair, the night itself with her eagle wings. O you, hikers from the cold north, that flow free, the admiration that fills your clamor, no more beautiful than her can be found on this earth. Carl Schmitt, born 1888 in Prussia. Now, this is quite an important person when it comes to understanding politics. We can talk about him for hours, but let's just discuss a few concepts, a few of the books.
Dieses liberale Bürgertum, der des demokratischen Trends, der in der Zeit lag, lebte der Illusion, Liberalismus und Demokratie sei dasselbe.
So these are the two books that are usually brought up, talking about Carl Schmitt, which is political theology and the concept of the political. And I should do an honorable mention to the third one, which is constitutional theory. There is quite a lot of hatred towards Carl Schmitt for reasons of his political stance, but one interesting aspect is Schmitt was brought back into academia because of anarchists, because anarchists really likes his theory, and now his theory is being used both by the left and the right. Before going in, I just want to do another quick note. The damn foreword and introduction is half the books at this point. Come on. So we're going to go into the misusage of this book, which is the friend and foe idea, because it's constantly being misused by focus on territorial or group ideologies in contrast to the enemy, but not understanding why the contrast is important. According to modern linguistic usage, the state is the political status of an organized people in an enclosed territorial unit. This is nothing more than a general paraphrase, not a definition of the state, since we're concerned here with the nature of the political. Such a definition is unwarranted. To show you misuse of the friend and foe concept, here it is. As a person who misunderstands what Schmidt means, but at the same time goes into it by describing an enemy in counter to himself without understanding what he's doing. He says the enemy is bad, we have to fix the enemy is bad. I am good, I am friend, they are enemy, fight them. But it's like, no, you identify your group, your territory, by describing an enemy, because it's easier to describe something in the negative than in the positive. Quick note from Schmidt. These then receive the meaning by presupposition of a stable state within framework they operate. Thus, there exists, for example, a jurisprudence or a literature pertaining to the concept of the political club or the political meaning in the laws of association.
Ein Volk kann mit sich selbst identisch sein, wenn es in einer eindeutigen, klaren Weise einen Feind hat, wo klare Freund-Feind-Unterscheidungen sind, wie heute im Nahen Osten oder dergleichen, ist die Identität ohne weiteres klar. Freund heißt in diesem Falle die intensivste Gruppe und Verbindung von Menschen. Und Feind heißt eben die intensivste Spannung.
The friend and enemy concept ought to be understood in their concrete and existential sense, not as metaphors, symbols, not mixed and weakened by economy, moral or other conceptions, least at all in private, an individualistic sense of a psychological expression of private emotions and tendencies. They are neither normative nor pure spiritual antithesis. Liberalism, in one of its typical dilemmas of intellectual and economic, has attempted to transform the enemy from the viewpoint of economies into a competitor, from the intellectual point into a debating adversary. In the dominion of economies, there are no enemy, only competitors. And it's through a moral and ethical world, perhaps only debating adversaries. It is irrelevant here whether one rejects or accepts, or perhaps finds an atavistic remnant of a barbaric time that nations continue and group themselves according to the friend and enemy, and hopes that there is an antithesis will one day vanish from the world. And whether it perhaps sounds pedagogic reasoning to imagine the enemy no longer existing at all, the concern here is neither the abstraction nor the normative ideas, but inherent realities and real possibilities of such distinctions. One may not share these hopes and pedagogical ideals, but rationally speaking, it cannot be denied that nations continue to group themselves according to the friend and enemy antithesis, that the distinction still remains actual today, that is even present possibly for every person existing in the political sphere. So we move on to the next book, Political Theology. This is also just an amazing book, also mostly written by anarchists. Try to bring this book back into the fray because it goes into how religion and politics, but in specifically the Catholic Church, because Carl Schmitt was Catholic, has influenced the political landscape, both in the sense of the rhetoric, but also how law is written and how kingdoms are ruled. And a good way of understanding this, it goes into quite a lot obviously, is during feudalism, for example, the king, the warrior caste, they were too focused on ruling, in a sense, ruling with the sword. They were not learned men. They couldn't spend 10 years in a school learning how to write and read. But who could do that? Monks could do that. So monks mostly wrote law, wrote down history. This then influenced how law would then be framed through mostly a Christian worldview. I use the example of the Rotary Law Code here as an example where things can change based upon who writes down the law codes. When the Lombards came to Italy, they had a verbal law code that they brought from Scandinavia. But it was later written down, first in a more Arianistic sense, because they were Arianists, where God the Father was mentioned, but not really in that detail. And then later on it was written down by Byzantine monks, Paul the Deacon, for example. And then God and prayer was much more taken in towards the law code. So it changed based upon who wrote it. If a king wrote it of the people, at the time when they were mostly pagan, semi-Arianistic, the Father, all Father was there. It's seen in the law code versus when the Byzantine monks wrote it down, and then God and the Son became much more focused. But It also has an influence today in rhetoric such as Armageddon, the end of times rhetorics. As you saw with the former quote, this is a Christian concept that he's talking about. Like, if we do not win, this is the end. This is a Christian concept. It goes into pretty much every political idea for the moment, that if you're not part of us, you're the end times. If I don't win, it's the end times. And you heard this with, well, you hear with Trump, but it actually started with Hillary Clinton, who said if she doesn't win, this is the end of the United States. Is that the end of the United States? Of course it isn't, but it's a very good political tool and a mindset people have that if my ideas, because I'm the moral, I'm the good, and they're the enemy, it goes back to that obviously, they're the enemy, they're the bad, if they win, this is the end of times, and it's a Christian concept. I am one with God, they are not with God, if they win, we lose. And then I will quickly go into the constitutional theory. A lot of what Schmidt's talking about is also creating stability. Mostly stability in text and writing, but also how to gain power and gain stability after, for example, a coup or revolution, or what happened in Nazi Germany. And this book in particular goes into how to write a proper constitution, what should retain in a proper constitution, how to ratify constitutions, how to bring in different concepts into constitutions. Overall, a very good theory. Neoliberals, I think, use this quite a lot. Constitutional theory, it's great, but it goes into many other concepts as well.
Wie richtig gerechnet, erst sich die legale Macht geben zu lassen, Verfügung über Polizei und so weiter. Dann eine Wahl gewinnen mit Hilfe also dieser
Prämien auf den
legalen ja, macht es aber eine ganz knappe Mehrheit. Und nun kommt ja eigentlich das noch fantastischere, dann ein verfassungsänderndes Ermächtigungsgesetz zu bekommen, ja, da kann man wirklich tiefsinnig werden.
There's obviously a lot more I can talk about. I can talk about the sovereign and stability and a few other concepts, but we'll stop with this one and move to the next. Another quick thing I want to point out for the eagle-eyed viewer that knows me, I have a website called The State of Exception, which is based upon Carl Schmitt's ideas of state of exception, but mostly in a poetic sense that the current world we're living in is the state of exception. And I have a book out as well that talks somewhat about the theories and a few other things, so do check that out. It's a way of supporting me as well. Varg Vikernes, another person I can talk for hours about, not because of his political theories, but because of his influence in paganism and modern-day black metal scene, and honestly, just the gossip. Not a fan of black metal myself, but I can appreciate a little Hail Odin, Hail Odin, Hail Odin, Hail Odin, Hail Odin, Hail Odin. The Norwegian black metal scene got somewhat fame in the 90s because of the burning down of churches, with a semi-satanic view and all of it. And then later on, Varg Vikernes himself got the fame for murdering another black metal artist named Euronymous Oystein Aarseth, that Varg Vikernes stabbed 23 times. He claimed it to be self-defense, which no, the courts obviously didn't think it was. But he also took a picture of the corpse and used it as an album cover. So, pretty metal, bro! But in truth, and sort of the feeling the internet has for the moment, what made Varg more famous is, since he got out of jail, his commentary. He's been talking about all types of things, adding his 2 cents on most subjects. He got a life in France, has multiple children, a wife. It's a lifestyle many envy.
Staying alive, staying alive, staying alive.
Curtin Yarvin, or as I like to frame him, the dumber version of Nick Land. He's part of that sort of tech.com bubble intellectuals that came around the 2000s, especially 2008, but obviously it was before that. Same thing with Peter Thiel or Kurt Doolittle, for my sake. I have a lot of money, I think I'm smart, let me create something new, focusing a lot on monarchy, for example. But the concept of cathedral was brought up a lot by him, and that's now a word most people use, explaining the liberal zeitgeist of the current world. But much more than that, he was brought in towards the mainstream around 2020, because that was when a new right was forming. And I don't mean a new right like the alt-right or anything like that, around 2016, but a more new right, which is the controlled opposition American right, with Peter Thiel, Steve Bannon, and these people, the controlled opposition that are obviously bankrolled by, if you read the files, you get a little bit of an understanding. And he's part of this, brought in mostly by the Democratic side, having a fascination of him as well. Because, again, when I pointed out previously, Hillary Clinton, certain part of the Democratic establishment has a little bit of a thing with certain right-wing stability concepts of Carl Schmitt, for example. And there was some sort of amalgamation between Curtin Yarvin and Hillary Clinton as well around the first Trump election, which was interesting. But stability overall, that's all that matters really for the Clinton side, the more pragmatic or political realists. Curtin Yarvin was part of creating a new stability concepts brought forth by Nick Land and Schmittian concepts, talking a lot about monarchy or the focus on stability with technology and this sort of forever lasting sovereign. And forever lasting sovereign is quite an interesting aspect and a bit of a fight between Nick Land, Curtin Yarvin, and Peter Thiel. Particularly Thiel not liking it because the point is technological singularity, as in, well, everlasting sovereign is an AI, for example, of sorts. And Peter Thiel then views that as the Antichrist, or, well, Antichrist will come in certain aspects. So the AI Antichrist can be brought forth through that technological singularity that Curtis and Nick is talking about. But yeah, a lot of his economic ideas is from Hans Hermann Hoppe. So this is the idea of the monarchy or nation states and smaller republics. But as some friend of mine pointed out, like give Curtin Yarvin a copy of the Leviathan and he might implode because he doesn't grasp Hobbes at all. Rene Geunon, born 1886, one of the more influential people in religious studies, I would say, and especially influential in Schmitt's work on political theology, because Geunon works through a sort of time span of religious influence, where he looks into history and formulating it through mostly focusing on the priestly class, just as Schmitt did, but a much more broader, long-time horizon way of thinking on how society is built upon this priestly class structures, as in ritualistic structures, for example, or other concepts where the warrior caste, which other people like Julius Evola brought up, focusing on the warrior caste, he focused on the priestly class, and any moving away from the priestly class, which is the most influential caste in Western civilization, is moronic. Something Schmitt also brings up, it's kind of moronic looking at the king when the priest is the one writing history. Not just writing history, is doing the rituals of the king, is deciding what the king does, is deciding how the king self-identifies. And this is throughout majority of the reign's times. Obviously, there's certain exceptions that you can bring up, which Evola likes to bring up, but overall, Geunon focusing on the priestly class, ritualistic, systematic, symbolistic structures of the entirety of civilization. And the we're doing today, removing ourselves from this fact. And what will bring down Western civilization, which is the destruction of the traditional, focusing on the modern, where you remove that long lineage for something new and experimental, which will bring down the collapse of everything. The focus on caste, for example, is because he was inspired by Hindu gurus that came into Europe. We don't know exactly who, but that was influential. So he wrote a lot about Hinduism in a Western perspective and brought in a new era of Hinduism in Europe that then later also obviously inspired Theosophy and inspired New Age and all of this. but bringing forth this symbiosis between Hinduism and Western Catholic Christianity of sorts. Rene Geunon was a Catholic. Again, you can talk for hours about this. It goes into detail about, well, the smallest of aspects of civilization, how everything is formed, but it's in very well detailed and sort of systematic how he does it, which brings up certain errors, and you can't do everything systematic, but it is really good. The school of thought brought after him is a traditional school by Fridtjof Schorn, Martin Links, Avola, as you heard about, Spengler, in a sense, Dugin and Schmidt, and many of these other concepts. Again, this is a man who sat down and wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote and created it all into one very complicated to read in one sense, symbiosis of here's an understanding how we work. I have made videos about this previously, talking about rituals, and I've made a video where he mocks Avola because he thinks Avola is genuinely a brainlet retard. It just, oh, it's good. So yeah, enjoy the little clip and then we'll move on.
You stupid.
They're not.
As long as a man desires paradise or has fear of hell, he will not be able to aspire to the last grade of initiation.
21.
Željko Malnar.
Željko Malnar.
Okay, I get it. This is a bit of an odd one in comparison to the other ones. But let's have fun with this one. And also, I know, you look at Croatian people, you know, and you think, yeah, these are Croatian people. These are definitely modern-day Croatian people. Majority of his filmography is documentaries based upon Africa or Latin America. And half of the documentaries are women's breasts. I can't show it. It's just Native American breasts for some reason.
Kuću. Pogledajte tu djecu, pogledajte tu nevinost. To je nada svijeta. U to treba vjerovati. Bože moj, evo sad to gledam, kako je to lijepo. Evo ovo dijete koje je tad možda imalo koliko, godinu dana, sada je 27 godina. Di je? A gdje je ova mala sad? A gdje su ova dva mala klinca? Imaju sad 27 godina. Ja, a vjerovatno.
They're decently cute, but again, half of them are naked men and women. I guess some sort of good documentary, but it reminds me a lot of this sort of 90s era sexual European documentary style. Quite odd. Then he obviously got famous in Croatia and did many Croatian shows. I'll show you one for fun called The Nightmare Stage. I don't understand it. I don't speak Croatian. It's not really much I can talk about this guy. But hey, we talked about him. Let's move on.
Pijano đubre.
Ševu pokaži. Ševo, daj ti neke reci na ove pozive.
Ma ja velim, pa to je pijano đubre. Šta vređaš? To sam vam puno puta rekao.
Halo? Evo tu vređi.
Evo, ovo je mlada dama. Dobio Yukio, izvolite.
Koju pičku materinu političari se javljaju? Pravi političari.
Zašto nas jebe hrvatski narod?
Pa takvi smo se rodili i takvi smo umrli.
Istina, da.
Znači ja sam uvredio Željka Malnara što on meni kaže nemoj piti. Pa ja bi već kad bi slušao druge, rekao mi je jedan, kaj?
Georgy Chulkov. Now this is more in my ballpark. I really like this. It's going to be fun going through this one. But I want to say there's absolutely no interest in this man. Looking up on YouTube, 2 views, baby. He's part of an era called the Silver Age of literature. He was also quite into philosophy and politics. One of the concepts he created is mystical anarchism. But it is a mindset within Russian symbolism. It combines mystical worldview with social views of the era. to fight against dogmatics in religion, moral philosophy and politics, affirming of the mystical personality in society, internal freedom of the individual, striving for conclarity, super-individualism, rejection of the world, meaning mystical anarchists do not accept the world as is, and dream of a transformed world. A lot of the Russian novelists after the fact was inspired by one of his books, Theoretical Shortcoming, Confusion of Presentation and a Lack of Independence. And especially in Russian anarchistic circles, where a lot of people took up this Russian symbolism into their anarchistic worldview, creating things like the Eastern detachment of the Templars of the Universal Order of the Knight Templar, or Order of Light, which was to combine the elements of Freemasonry and anarchism. Russian symbolism, mystical anarchism, and the Silver Age of literature did have an influence later on. So Gregory is not someone you should just ignore if you're interested in Russian literature. I'll read you one of his poems, one of the poems that I saw in one of those 2 Views videos, but why not? Purple Autumn. Purple autumn unloosed her trenches and flung them on the heavens and over the dew-heavy fields. She came as a guest to the old, silent house, singing the grasses with red. Through the garden she moved, up to the balcony. Scarcely she touched the fragile old rails. She pushed the door panel softly. Softly she entered the room, sprinkling the rugs with her sun-yellow dust. Dropped a red leaf upon the piano. Even after the hour we heard her unceasing, her tireless rustling, rustle and stir and soft whisper, and our hands suddenly met, with no new words, new and forever false, as though we had hung a wrench of red roses on a black wrought iron door, lending into a vault where lay the rotten body of a beloved dream. Autumnly days were upon us, days of inscrutable longing. We were trending the stairs of autumn passion, in my heart a wound, like a lamp of an icon, burn and would not be quenched. The cup of autumnal poison we pressed to our lips. By the serpentine garden path autumn had led us, the crepuscular lilies upon the pale sand humble pond, and over the lilied waters and the roses of evening we loved, more superstitiously, and through the dark night, and the longer's bed, and at the feet of my love, I loved death anew. The mints rang tinkling like crystals at the brink of an autumn grave. Autumn and death drunkenly clinked their glasses. I pressed my thirsty lips to the feet of the icon lamp burnish. I drank the cup of love. Burned by the fires of sins, stretched on the crest of lusts, shamed, being needlessly faithless, I drank the cup of love. In the hours of ineffable dalliance, I sensed the whispers of autumn pain, of autumn passion. The kisses like keen needles, burned and pierced, weaving a wrench of thorns. After whatever just happened, I can now understand Leopold Von Sacher-Masoch expression. For you to understand who he is, the Macho in German doesn't make any sense, but what if I say masochism? The name masochism derives from him. And sadomasochism is Magister Sade and Leopold. He's born 1836 in Galicia. That should be telling you enough. And to summarize him, it's Baroness Bogdanov's romantic gesture to her lost soul in Galicia created ripples of sexual energy lasting for generations. More or less this type of relationship they was having. He was a quote-unquote slave or submissive towards this baroness in doing whatever needed. And he wrote about it. So, well, in fiction he wrote about it. So, shall we read it, I guess, for a bit?
Décidez-vous, faites quelque chose pour vous en convaincre.
Mais comment?
En faisant ce que font tous les amoureux. Faites-moi souffrir.
Wonder swiftly approached me. Her white satin dress flowed behind her in a long train, like silver, like moonlight. Her hair flared like flames against a white fur of her jacket. Now she stood in front of me, with her left hand firmly planted on her hips. In her right hand she held a whip. She uttered an abrupt laugh. "Now play has come to an end between us," she said with heartless coldness. "Now we will begin in dead earnest. You fool, I laughed at you and despise you. You who in your insane infatuation has given yourself as a plaything to me. The frivolous and capricious woman. You are no longer the man I love, but my slave. At my mercy even unto life and death. First of all, you shall have the taste of the whip in all seriousness, without having done anything to deserve it, so that you may understand what to expect if you're awkward, disobedient, or refractory. With the what? Okay, you get it? You get it? I'm gonna stop now. It continues like this. And 50 Shades of Grey. No, even worse. This is... She struck me in the face, warm blood ran down, but she laughed and continued her blows. He's tied up, by the way. Yeah, so about halfway in the book, it's a master-slave dynamic BDSM book. It's smut. I'm a big philosopher. I'm an Austrian nobleman in Galicia. I'm gonna write... No, he doesn't even write smut. It's based upon his actual life experience. It's not just a concept of the man being so submissive and super submissive in a relationship over someone who dominates him. It's also then the pity and the disgust the woman actually feels of a weak man, where they call a lion comes later on to, well, cock the slave, and you go through that pleading. The lioness had been hunted and driven until she was exhausted. She had fallen asleep among her pillows, laying on her back, her hands clenched, breathing heavily, and let the red light fall full of her wonderful face. "Severin," she began anew, "my poor unhappy friend." Her hand gently stroked my hair. "I am sorry, very sorry for you, but I can't help you. With the best intentions in the world, I know of nothing that can cure you." "Oh, Wanda, must it be?" I moaned in my agony. "What, Severin? What are you talking about? Don't you love me any more?" I continued. "Haven't you a little bit of pity for me? Has the stranger taken complete possession of you?" "I can't lie," she replied softly after a pause. "He has made an impression on me, which I haven't yet been able to analyze, further than I suffered and trembled beneath it. It's an impression of the sort I've met within the works of poems or on the stage, but I always thought it was a figment of my imagination. Oh, he is a man, like a lion, strong and beautiful and yet gentle, not brutal like the men of our northern world. I'm so sorry for you, Severin, I am. I must possess him. What am I saying? I must give myself to him, if he will have me." "Consider your reputation, Wanda, which so far has remained spotless," I exclaimed, "even if I no longer mean anything to you." "I'm considering it," she replied. "I intend to be strong as long as possible. I want..." She buried her head shyly in the pillow. "I want to become his wife, if he will have me." "Wanda," I cried, seized by my mortal fear, which always robs me of my breath, makes me lose possession of myself. "You want to be his wife? Belong to him for always? Oh, don't drive me away. He does not love you." "Who says that?" she exclaimed, flaring up. "He does not love you." I went on passionately. "But I love you. I adore you. I am your slave. I let you thread me underfoot. I want to carry you in my arms through life." "Who says he doesn't love me?" she interrupted vehemently. "Oh, be mine," I replied. "Be mine. I cannot exist, cannot live without you. Have mercy on me, Wanda. Have mercy." With this she turned over on the side, compassionately shoved me her back. "Good God! Are you a woman without flesh and blood? Haven't you a heart as well as I?" I cried, while my breast heaved convulsively. "You know who I am," she replied, coldly. "I am a woman of stone, Venus in furs, your ideal. Kneel down and pray to me." And then later on he tries to state, I will kill myself if I'm not with you. Then he writes letters. And at the very end, the last page, he proclaims that he hates women. He hates them. I was a donkey. If only I've beaten her. And then it ends with, the moral of the tale is this: whoever allows himself to be whipped deserves to be whipped. It's weirdly enough is a pretty good character description of a cock. Of Mr. Idubs of Galicia here. If a woman has no respect for you, if you ever go below her, submissive to her to such an extent, it's a bit of a, imbalance, she will never respect you. And if you never respect you, if you beg, if you whimper, you blah, 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 put yourself in that position, you will not be good. You deserve to be whipped, according to Leopold.
Vous êtes incroyable.
Si vous ne voulez pas de moi comme mari, prenez-moi comme esclave. Traitez-moi avec une divine cruauté.
Pourquoi devrais-je maltraiter l'homme qui m'aime?
Mais je vous adorerai encore plus.
Je ne souhaite pas qu'on m'adore.
Toutes les femmes veulent être adorées, tout comme notre Créateur. Créez-moi, ruinez-moi, réduisez-moi à néant.
Ramon Gomez de la Serna. Some of you might know him from the Hoi mod Red Flood, where he is the accelerationist Spain. He's known as a cubist, a futurist, avant-gardist, but mostly a comedian. Most of his works is comedy. It's short comedy lines and jokes to laugh at the world around you, because the world is odd.
Calicinosa de todo el gallinero. Esta cosa lenta. Esos gritos de locura que brotan de el corral caliente por agosto. Son alboroto de todo el pueblo, que son la raya con que se señala toda la dimensión del paisaje.
Most of his work is in Spanish, which obviously makes it a bit hard for me to read. It's sort of not actually that possible. Most famous book of his, Gregoria, which is a collection of small sentences of jokes, like a joke sentence, one-liners, punchlines. He had a lot of respect in the Spanish world, especially in Spain during the Civil War. He stayed in Spain during the Civil War and was liked by the elites of sorts, from my understanding. And so he's both left and right. Obviously being liked by everybody also makes you not being liked by everybody. The paradox of it. He met up with Diego Rivera, which is the husband of Frida Kahlo, and Diego drew this painting of him.
Esta mano sirve para en la tempestad del público calmarla plenamente. Y por fin, cuando el orador ya está próximo al final de su discurso, sirve para preparar su planear. Porque esta cosa que tiene el orador de aviador se remonta, parece que va seguro en sus palabras. De pronto se rompe la cabeza en una de ellas, señala la caída en barrena en esa palabra que le falla.
Jim Bell, or James Dalton Bell. He's still alive. He is born in 1958 in Ohio. He popularized a concept in the 90s about how, with the growth of the internet, the concept of untraceable assassination will become possible using untraced digital currency or cryptocurrency. This is obviously before the time. And then with crypted digital currency, there's also crypted messaging or information that can be put in to go on hits on anybody who has a disliking of anybody. So as long as you have the money, you can kill more or less anybody at any time using internet assassins, or Red Rooms or assassins using the dark web, sort of that spooky story that was told many times. He's an anarcho-capitalist.
I'm a libertarian. I've been a libertarian all my life. I realized I was a libertarian in 1975. Libertarians are motivated by something called the non-aggression principle, or the non-initiation of force principle. It's been humorously described as the rights of my fist and at your nose, okay? I can swing my fist all around until I get to your nose, in which case my right ends, all right? In other words, non-aggression. We have a society where almost everything today is done by ultimate threat of government force. If government force, they don't show up automatically. If you don't pay your taxes, they'll send you some threatening mail. If you send it, if they still don't send if you don't send your taxes, they go to your bank and check your bank account. Or if you don't have a bank account, you have gold, they break in and take it. So ultimately, governments are based on the ultimate threat of violence to you if they don't get what they want.
There's a great video about it called James Bell's assassination policy. I float this up on you so you can see a bit of a text. You see cash with details, the decryption key, and then money in encryption that will be getting to you once you do the deed. It's sort of already been debunked. Red rooms and online assassins in the dark web is not really a thing. It's a hell of a ghost tale that people like to tell each other around the campfire of the internet. Like, oh yeah, the assassins. You got the Silk Road and all of that. So it's a lot of decryption, but that's dead, I would say. The golden era of the internet, where that was possible, isn't anymore. Overall, from watching that part of him, he's a bit delusional. He says if Bitcoin increases 3%, he has a complete strategy on how to increase the volume of Bitcoin. And if he follow his strategy, Bitcoin will increase about 3 times, and it was in 2019. And says if it increases 3 times, is my doing. I did it. I increased the value of Bitcoin.
Is anybody going to argue that, well, Val, you didn't really do that. It was actually just some market fluctuation. I think most people around here would agree that if the price of Bitcoin triples in the next few weeks, it will be because of me. It's a good project. It'll be fun to do. It'll get people to think. And it might cause a lot of politicians to resign. Because I'm thoroughly convinced these people are afraid. They know what happens.
Otto Weininger. With this one, I just take the cat out of the bag immediately. It's a very Jewy Jew. But that's what makes all of this so fascinating. Like, there is a lot to this man. Again, this is a stereotypical sort of merchant middle class Jew. Well-educated, get pushed into academia. His father is a goldsmith. And he's focused a lot on the concept of the sexual. In all of that, he also hates Jews, which is also a very Jewy thing to do. Self-hating Jew is a concept within the Jewish mindset. So with all of that, you can understand as well, when finding articles or reading about Otto, it's very hateful against him, being like, oh, he's an anti-Semite, he's a horrible misogynist, he's influenced National Socialists. I view more of it as a tragedy, all of this story, to be honest. Otto is born in 1880. At the age of 1898, he went to the University of Vienna. He could speak English, Greek, Latin, French, Spanish, Italian, Swedish, Danish, and Norwegian. And German, of course. So an incredibly intelligent young man, but also quite sensitive. In 1901, at the age of 21, he published his first work, Eros and the Psyche. He met with Sigmund Freud, who didn't actually like the text, and sort of just said, begun. He received his doctorate in 1902, so very young, 22 years of age, and he converted to Protestantism. In 1902, he went and watched Richard Wagner's Parsifal. He went to Oslo to watch Henrik Ibsen's Peer Gynt, and when he came back home to his life in Vienna, he was depressed. In 1903, he published another book, Sex and Character, a fundamental investigation. Harshly criticized, people claimed he was plagiarizing, so in the 3rd of October, he went to a hotel in Vienna where Ludwig von Beethoven died, and he shot himself. So let's look into his work. A equals A, big A. Very important. Small a equals smaller a, big A equals big A. Unironically illogical thing, by the way, that's how it works. That is why he inspired Wittgenstein. So that's called first order logic. So he brings in that logical framework into the idea of the sex. And that's the book Sex and Character. I showed you the chapters before when I talked about his lifestyle, so sort of get a bit of an insight of what he's talking about. Very anti-Spinozized and a Kantian and a logical framework, and try to bring that into the sexes. Page 191. Given these ambivalent cases, the deciding factor can only be a man who is able to make a woman a mother through his personality, not only by sexual intercourse, but even by a single look. Marriage can only be introduced by man. There is no legal institution of female origin. Every law comes from man, and only a great many customs from women. For that reason alone, it will be totally wrong to derive law from custom or custom from law. They are quite different things. Only man could have the desire and the strength to introduce order into the chaos of sexual relationship, as indeed to introduce order, rules, and laws as such. There really seemed to be a time when women were allowed to exert great influence on social development in many people, but at that time marriage was unheard of. The age of matriarchy was an age of polyandry. To summarize that chapter, a woman is only two things. She's either a mother or a prostitute. A woman cannot be the third thing, which is a virgin. There's no such thing as a virgin woman. And the man is the deciding factor. If a woman becomes a mother, that's by impregnating her, or if she becomes a prostitute, that's by not impregnating her. If a man never impregnates a woman, she's a prostitute. And if she gets impregnated, she is a mother. While there are two distinctions, they are also the same. So it's the nature of a woman to be seeking male strength in one way or another, because women do not create or have the ability of that sort of power. Only the man has. And then it's up to the men not becoming females, which is something he imposes too. This is the A equals A. A man needs to also become a male, actually have those powers, not be tricked by the trickery of the female, which will happen, and so on and so forth. Yeah, it's get the point why this could be deemed as controversial. And they have chapter 13, Judaism, which is where people deem him as an anti-Semite. 283. In the Christian, pride and humility. In the Jew, superciliousness and groveling are in conflict with each other, as are self-assurance and the contradictions in the former, and the arrogance and devotion in the latter. The Jew's lack of understanding of the idea of mercy is connected with his total lack of humility. His slavish disposition is the source of his heteronomous ethics. The Ten Commandments, the most immoral book of laws in the world, which promise well-being on earth, and the conquest of the world as a reward to those who meekly obey the powerful will of another. The Jew's relationship with Jehovah, the abstract idol which he fears like a slave, and the name of which he does not even dare to enunciate, he fears like a slave, characterizes him, in analogy to women, as a being in need of domination by an alien force. Schopenhauer once wrote, "The word of God means a human being who has made the world." This is indeed true of the God of the Jews, of the divine in humanity. The God who lives in my breast, the genuine Jew, knows nothing. He has no understanding of what Christ or Plato, Mr. Achthart, or St. Paul, Goethe, or Kant, or every Aryan from the Vedic priest, the magnificent closing line of Vikernes' three motives in the ground of belief, meant by the divine, or of the word "I am with you always, even to the end of the world." What is given to human being by God is his soul, but the absolute Jew is soullessness. I hope this gives a bit of an insight of what type of person he was, and just to make clear, anything I've said, obviously I don't stand for any of this. This is his words, so yeah. Interesting character, definitely. But we'll go to the next one. Reza Negarestani. He is 49 years of age, so pretty young. He was inspired by Nick Land early on, so the focus of technology and this sort of language that Nick Land liked to use. I understood like Ouroboros and a few things, but more or less poetry or sort of technological poetry in a lot of his writing to explain reality of sorts. And then later stayed to become a rationalist, but still with the focus of the technological advances. His main focus is looking at technology in human history and the advancements of human history and where it's going, where we were, where's the patterns in all of it.
Technology, particularly cognitive technologies, cognitive technique, right, which would be tool making and language, are essentially an index that facilitated the emergence of a deep object called intelligence, as we know it today, such that we can go reflect back and say, oh my God, this has evolved over a very long time. So you see, from a certain sort of perspective, the fact that we see the role of technology in our evolution, self-recognize our history as being evolved in this sort of bottom-up, vertical, but also diagonal, horizontal complexity, is a result of this sort of technology, or cognitive technologies like language and tool use that allow us to go back and slowly decipher the deep object called intelligence.
Because he's alive, let's say the statement of, if you talk to Reza, what would we talk about? Well, mostly, one thing I would like to talk to him about is what I've talked about before, aesthetic anthropology. Focusing on the current art forms, aesthetics himself, writes that a lot. Again, that's why his book is sort of. That's why his book is quite. That's why many of his books is quite colorful in its symbolisms, because art and the way of describing art, in a sense, I guess surrealist, but it's realist. But the way you frame something in aesthetics is a way of framing an understanding of the world. That's something would be of interesting conversation, especially with the person we're talking about last, about George Bataille, which aesthetic anthropology is sort of everything there. So this is a precursor, I say Reza is a precursor for Bataille in the later conversation, on how via the aesthetics and via art you can describe a story. Now, I prefer the Nick Land. Well, no one really prefers. No one understands the Nick Land stories. No one does. You need to be high on quite a lot of drugs to understand any of the technological nonsense. And we do know, sort of, with all of this, with mathematical and logical systems, sort of computer science is a fake field. Nonsensical field, but whatever. But specifically with computer science or mathematicianal art, it can be very hard to understand if you're not part of that sort of already established aesthetic mindset. But it's a way of them describing reality via technology, and Bataille later via sex, because he's a degenerate. One of the concepts that Reza really likes is all of these damn wiggly lines, squiggly lines back and forth. No, it's time. It's an issue of time. So most of his books for the moment, and what he's writing for the moment, is about time travel and time paradoxes. How things can go in towards each other in different ways and loop on each other.
What does that mean? Well, this is essentially the premise of All You Zombies, the shorter story, wherein the protagonist, who is now a young man, goes to a bar and is writing some sort of column for bored women. Then he goes and sees this bartender, and the bartender starts a very special conversation with this young man, who strangely looks like as if he has recently gone through gender transition. And then as the conversation unfolds, we see that the story involves with a certain sort of Ouroboros chronic figure, that essentially the bartender is the older version of this young man, who works for an agency which is called the Temporal Agency. It is he has recruited himself as an agent, going back in time, and then rescuing herself, getting injured during one of the missions, going through a radical sex surgery, becoming a man, marrying herself or himself, giving a child, and this child put in an orphanage through this special program made by himself in the Temporal Agency, supposed to be an agent, a time-traveling agent, that ultimately, at the same time, become a terrorist and a rescuer of the world, right? And he's always, and the last passage, the last paragraph of this story is that he has to kill himself, the terrorist version of himself, which is an old drunkard man. But he also misses, his female version, who basically, he says at the end that I love you dearly, I miss you so much. And then the famous line that we know where we have all come from, meaning he and his other versions, her previous version, the child.
Or in other words, what drugs are you taking, bro? What the heck are you on about? Okay, that's sort of the concept. You had to be in that sort of technological intelligence to understand that. No, it doesn't. The concern is in the interesting aspect, obviously, as he talks about, with understanding does base upon language quite a lot, and it says human development through language. Yeah, absolutely. What differs me from the caveman? Technically nothing biologically, but mentally and with the technology around me, a lot changes. But I mean, it's not very smart. I remember when I was 14, 15, and I came up with this myself in history class. Like, oh, people don't change, technology does. I genuinely remember coming up in that in school when I was 14 years old. It's not that deep. I'm sorry, it's just... there's a lot more to this guy, but he hasn't caught my interest. And with Nick Land's language, people have already said that I misunderstand a lot of it, but I'm sorry, taking LSD or any sort of ketamine drug and then just rambling isn't a good way of telling a story.
You organize it. This is what really project of ethics is. Design of a conduct that manipulates what the self is, what intelligible constitution is. It constructs it. And this is the project of self-realization, for example, for ramification of the Kantian project in the sense of ethics, and then goes to the new Confucianism and certain programs of ethics.
It was really just as a clarification. So you would say this ramification is like in principle possible for various different like philosophical disciplines, whether it's aesthetics or ethics.
Okay, I don't know. I have to think about this, but I just wanted to. The reason that I went for ethics, I wanted to just emphasize this idea of engineering, that engineering epistemology becomes co-constitutive and integral part of making sense of ontology and making it. The main kernel of this idea is actually a philosophical idea. And this is really the initial trigger of the project of ethics as a design of conduct. That crosscuts between ontology, between epistemology, between manipulation, between design.
George Bataille. Let's begin this. So let's go into what I'm talking about with Reza, the aesthetic anthropology aspect, because I talk about it in the video I made about him. So I'm just going to bring that one up so you can watch it and we can discuss it. Bataille is a surrealist, so the way he explains a story and multiple stories is through a surrealist lens. So if I can get more into detail of aesthetic anthropology, the issue I have with surrealism, the reason why I'm not a fan of it, it can take any sort of form, and then you just say, oh well, then it's artsy, regardless of what it actually is. Anything. Oh, a woman makes birth of a giant scorpion in her kuch. It comes out and starts fighting things. Well, that is so deep and so part of... It explains the condition of man. It doesn't do anything. It's nonsense. It's when you're high on some sort of drug and you just want to write something for the sake of writing. Grotesque for the sake of grotesqueness. Okay, I know that I just watched the video. Man, I'm more disgusted by it. But it's understandable disgusted by it. So the way he wants to describe a story, let's say a story of relationship or a story of a moral character, is by doing like Marquis de Sade. Now, George Bataille is a really bad version of Marquis de Sade, and a really bad version even of Leopold that we talked about previously, Masoch. Where he wants to explain a story of moral rights and wrongs and sexual rights and wrongs by describing something in quite grotesque details. That can be such as children, if you get my point with that. Shrimp, if you get my point with that. There is a reason why it was marked, but in the same time, I don't know. I can talk to you for hours about Marquis de Sade, even Leopold. Leopold actually fascinated me. I want to talk more about Leopold. There was something honest with what he wrote, because he went through it, he lived through it, he understood it through his own experience, and the way he wrote it was simple. So, the feeling of dread and the feeling of being in that submissive position, I can understand, because he writes it because he feels it. With Bataille, there is no feeling of it. Bataille was an even failure in his own sexual life. So he didn't have a bunch of virgins as throwing themselves at him, as stories hardly want to explain, because, he even created a religious organization in his university where the end goal was to sacrifice a virgin, and he couldn't get a virgin to agree upon being sacrificed. What? But overall, Bataille was even mocked at his time. But, so, with aesthetic anthropology, it's explained with Reza, and okay, I'm going to give Reza a little bit more credit here. The way you describe a story throughout its time, and especially Goethe, if you want to take a good one with understanding the human psyche, take Goethe as an example. Or even Otto! Damn, even Otto is better than Bataille. I'm sorry, but I don't like Bataille. I think Bataille is a moron. It's fascinating. But explaining the human condition through linguistics, through the way they draw something, the way they explain something, everyone in this have so well done it. Okay, credit to Reza. It's absolutely correct. Like, the way that the other gentlemen in this 12 stories have explained things through their way of describing a story is describing the human condition. Just not this guy, just not Bataille. He is a copy of Marquis de Sade 100 years after, where he rewrites the story of de Sade. And he rewrites it poorly too. Marquis de Sade goes through a story of let's say, a virgin girl, a young girl who is destitute. She has to survive, and a way of surviving is through your body, where she ends up in prison. She has to offer herself to a god, but she doesn't want to because she's still a virgin. There's an honor in being a virgin still, but she can use on selling off her purity to another man as a way of gaining leverage. Understandable. 120 Days of Sodom is just the Epstein files in modern ways, and it's explaining why people are eating children today. It's explaining why, in such a proper way, an actually well-written way, of why the human condition leads us to a destructive pattern. Bataille tried the same thing, and he just failed. And then somebody say, but bro, Bataille's about transgressions, bro. It's about breaking that taboo and seeing where the actual human conditions lie. Fuck off. Genuinely. You have to be dumb. So are the other guys, but they do it in a proper manner. The only transgression that happened here is that his wife left him, Sylvain Bataille, for Lacan, for Jacques Lacan. That is a transgression in and of itself. Being cooked, that's a transgression. My boy Bataille, at least the Galician man, wrote a good story that transcended him. You just got cooked by Lacan. So I'm gonna make this an hour long because I'm so close to an hour. I'm gonna make it an hour long exactly. Walter Benjamin, someone I covered before, describes Bataille's acapelle, which is this cult of his fascination with sacrifice as pre-fascist aestheticism. What nonsense. But anyway, sacrifice is fascism now. Okay, buddy. Okay, thumbs up. The concept of pornography I want to go into here again. Story of the Eye, I've talked about it. Watch my video about it. It's old, dated, and I genuinely don't like it. But in the sense, it was read as pure pornography when it started in the States here. And then it's like, oh, it has a deeper meaning to it once you go into the... I'm sorry, I can't go into pages upon pages upon pages upon pages upon pages of children and then see a bigger meaning with that. I just can't. Regardless of that, there's one interesting aspect. A bit early on have networking with surrealist publications, because I was thinking about surrealists more, and I was thinking about maybe doing something with the surrealist field. So I've been in the rooms with the surrealist publications, in the room where they sell. So I sit in a stool in the middle of a room, and it's just pornography in every single wall, mostly of course Bataille, but most surrealism has just become pure pornography at this point. But half of all written surrealist literature is just straight up porn, and it's pictures of, women's leg, women's thighs, so on and so forth. Just nudity, tits, cocks. That is what surrealism has become. And that's because of Bataille. We'll start this with Murray Rothbard, an American Jewish economist, which created the theory of anarcho-capitalism. And that Wojak is not him. That's just the average ANCAP. This is him. Murray Rothbard is also an extension of what we can define as sort of Jewish individualism. That every man has to fight for himself, his own egotistical interests, and through the merits of the individual, using the free market, they can utilize in best effect a better and freer world. You can see this, for example, in Ayn Rand's idea. We'll talk about that a bit later. But the idea that he popularized even more is the NAP, the non-aggression principle. No one may threaten or commit violence, aggression, against another man's person or property. Violence may be employed only against the man who committed such a violence, that is, only defensively against the aggressive violence of another. In short, no violence may be employed against a non-aggressor. Here is the fundamental rule from which we can deduct the entire corpus of libertarian theory.
Have you seen what it's like out there, Murray?
Murray Rothbard is quite an influential character, so we're going to cut this into 3 different parts, just talking about Rothbard here. Him versus Ayn Rand, because it has to be taken into consideration. Then we'll look into his theory, and then we'll look into the criticisms, and I have quite a lot in that regards. So let's start with Ayn Rand.
I am Andrew Ryan, and I'm here to ask you a question. Is a man not entitled to the sweat of his brow? No, says the man in Washington, it belongs to the poor. No, says the man in the Vatican, it belongs to God. No, says the man in Moscow, it belongs to everyone. I rejected those answers.
It belongs to the individual. And here is where the crux of the issue consists. So both of them, Ayn Rand and Murray Rothbard, is following a sort of Aristotelian Jewish individualism, but there are actually two sides of that sort of ideological battle, where Ayn Rand's focus on the individual, sort of personalism, such as the merit of the person, is what matters the most, in the sense of like the CEO, the inventor, the philosopher. And whatever that man creates, no matter the system as a whole, let's say the man creates sort of a hierarchical system. For example, in the game BioShock, you have Rapture, which is still a semi-hierarchical system where the merits, everybody has a role, but a different merit, so they get different positions based on merit, where Andrew Ryan is a monarch, a king, or a CEO. But Murray Rothbard rejects many of these concepts that Ayn Rand talks about. The personalism, yes, of course, the individual. Like, yes, of course, the merit of an individual, but if the merit of an individual creates something that aggresses upon another, for example, a state, it doesn't matter that that individual is of higher merits or higher purpose. The autocratic CEO of, Andrew Ryan or Robert House, if you can take examples of Ayn Randianism, but any sort of thing that crashes on another person's independence, self-right, self-governance, self-decisioning is aggression. And any aggression of that sort breaks the non-aggression principle. So Ayn Rand is a collectivist communist in the eyes of Murray Rothbard.
A man chooses, a slave obeys.
This is not a video on Ayn Rand, so we're going to continue with Murray Rothbard's other ideas. We're going to base it upon his book, Man, Economy and State with Power and Market. It's a 1,500-page book, so there's a lot of, economy talk, obviously, in this book. But let's take into consideration what is purchase. Like, what does a man want to purchase? How will he spend his money? If you can take down on how he spends his money and what he wishes to spend his money and resources on, then we can understand how force can then interrupt a man's want, a man's interests. Man allocates his time between leisure and productive labor, between labor for money and labor on unchangeable items, etc., in accordance with the principle of maximizing his psychic income. In deciding between labor and leisure, he weighs the marginal advantages of work with the marginal advantages of leisure. Every man must allocate his money resources in 3 and only 3 ways: in consumption spending, in investments expenditure, and in addition to his cash balance. Now we understand how a man allocates his money and what he wants. Rothbard then goes into violence in markets, what forces you away and how you wish to allocate your money. And one of the concepts he goes quite a lot in detail in is taxation, because he spends the first few hundred pages on how exchange work and the less interruption in that exchange, and if a man does it with his interests and how he wants to allocate something, it is for the greater value. But then what hinders that, the violence of that, is, for example, taxation. And this is what a government uses to coerce and to control the population, to make sure they don't spend their money in the way they wish to spend their money. All governments rest on the coerced levy of taxation, which is therefore a prime example of binary intervention. Government intervention, consequently, is not only triangular, like price control, it's also binary, like taxation, and therefore embeds into the very nature of government and governmental activity. As a result, a tax on money incomes creates both a substantial effect against work and in favor of leisure, or against the saving in favor of consumption, and income effect working in the opposite direction. So that's why when a lot of anarcho-capitalists talks about the freedom they want, they usually focus on the cultural, which really makes no sense because that's where people have the most issues with it. But what Rothbard in particular likes to bring up and constantly brings up is the effect it has on value and markets and exchange of things. That the stagnation in the market usually matters a lot on how punished you are in the market. The more punished you are, the less of an effect, unless you want to do, for example, work or savings or even consuming. Where not even partaking in a market, as in just going towards the aspect of leisure, becomes much more what a man then wants, because there is no incentive at all to work. And of course, Rothbard, being the other part of ANCAP, blames this on the state. There are two basic reasons why uniformity of income taxation is an impossible goal. The first stems from the very nature of the state. I want to bring up another little tidbit I found really interesting. Unemployment relief, instead of helping to cure unemployment, as often imagined, actually subsidizes and intensifies it. Something I've been thinking a lot about. Talk a lot about contractual law here, something that Rothbard has a bit of an issue with sometimes. But contractual law, if you pay in towards a system, you should be able to gain from that system. If you take the Ayn Rand example again, she, for example, took a lot of benefits from the government, something that Rothbard doesn't like. But it's the concept of riding the tiger. It's like, I'm paying into a system, I'm paying taxation, I'm being thieven off, I'm stolen violently, gun in my head, taking my money. Why should I not be able to take the money from the government? But it depends on the reason why taking the money, I guess, and Rothbard is correct here. Certain unemployment reliefs ensures that you stay unemployed and doesn't want to work, because we look back again why men spend their money on what they want to focus on. They rather then choose leisure because work becomes too costly. This is the interesting part. Working, laboring, becomes too costly to do, so you spend your time with leisure instead of working. And with that, talk about cost, let's talk about the criticism against Rothbard.
How about another joke, Murray?
There is a lot of criticism people have on Rothbard. Some, for example, Hans Hermann Hoppe or others. But so do I. I worked under proprietarianism before, split from it and created my own company, and we have this book here on natural jurisprudence, the core concepts. And we talk a lot about the criticisms we have with Rothbard. And you can see it in the chapter, The Road to Reciprocity. There are three ways to interact: trade, predation, and parasitism. Trade refers to two entities exchanging goods or services that both sides gains a profit from their strategy's point of view while bearing similar perceived costs. Predation is the opposite. One side forces the others into producing a profit for them, in disregard for how much cost that entails the other side. Parasitism lays between these two. Parasitic behavior is when one entity benefits from another one more than the other entity would allow for it if exhaustively informed about the consequences. It trades at an involuntary discount. An argument against Rothbard is that majority of the transaction in more of this ANCAP worldview is parasitic, because it's a licensing of immoral behavior. By creating a framework on exchange upon just the individuals, it misses a lot of the social aspects of transactions. A functional society is an amalgamation of different networked strategies with differing perceptions of the world, calculating, meaning finding solutions, and acting together to produce commons while being offered opportunities to fulfill desire for status and consumption. Then the book goes into the details and how calculating all of this works, but this will give you a bit of an insight. It's what Rothbard in his own calculation misses in society as a whole, and the commons, meaning everyone's actions in the effect of what we all share together. And every action is, of course, an action between two individuals or two companies, for example, but also the effect it has on the commons. You had to look at external costs, for example, and both capital gain, but also cultural and societal In a sense, how does it affect the collective? And saying that makes Rothbard go, what about the collective? But absolutely, the collective matters. You can't just ignore them. Just because there are 3 people in a group, you can't ignore that there are 3 people in a group and just look 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. When we learned mathematics for the first time, it was all 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. But then we learned to clump numbers together, making it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Sorry, that's a callback from another video a long time ago. That's just a funny little thing I thought about. But yes, Rothbard's calculations are wrong. And if you want to look at proper calculations, now not in that detail that Rothbard had it, obviously, that's 1,500 pages, check out the book. I can talk for ages, I record even more, but I'm gonna skip now. This, if you want more detail, I can make it like hours long. But let's skip it now. I'm gonna talk about the last point that was in the Wojak. He was also ridiculously racist and anti-Semitic, being blah blah blah. That's part of his sort of meritocratic equality concepts, that every man in his self-interest is a proper sovereign of himself, sort of, in a sense, and work for self-interest. So him stating, for example, that black people have it worse, it's like, it's them not properly taking care of their self-interest, they're dumber than the successful people. I mean, it's a meritocratic racism. It's sort of common thing, like, if you fail, it's your fault. While you can blame certain aspects of violence, but if you were given a blank slate and you still fail, it's your fault. So a lot of the giving out benefits for African Americans, example, he will be against because it doesn't benefit the individual's merits in that aspect. Carlo Michelstaedter. Carlo died a young man, 23 years old. Italian speaker, upper middle class Jewish, but with Catholic upbringing. Persuasion and rhetoric. An amalgamation of everything before him, and then everybody used him afterwards. Somewhere of Hegel, Marx, and Schopenhauer. Persuasion. Who says life? Who has consciousness? If life were to secure itself in a haven, contain in itself, and if it contains in itself, fixed and immutable, the deficiency would cease, and there would be no consciousness of absolute being. In some manner, in the infinitesimal fluctuation of variables, there is nothing that can have consciousness of this fluctuation. But the will is at every point a will for determining things. Determinacy is the attribute of value, consciousness. Nothing is for itself with regards to consciousness. Life is an infinite correlation of consciousness. We isolate a single determination of the will, for example, the stomach of a body, as if it lived for its own self. The stomach is all hunger, the attribution of value to food, the conscientious of the world insofar as it is edible. But in living for itself, before eating, it will have the pain of death, and in eating it will kill itself. In some manner, when two substances combine chemically, each satisfying the determinacy of each other, each departs from its nature, altered in reciprocal absorption, their life is suicide. Just as he says, I am, so he says, I know. What I do because I do it. I don't act by chance, but with full consciousness and persuasion. Thus does what lives persuade itself that whatever life it lives is life. But men grow tired of this path, feeling faint in solitude. The voice of pain is too strong. They no longer know how to endure it with their whole persona. They look behind, they look all around, and ask for the blindfold. They ask to be for someone, for something. For in the face of the demand of possession, they feel insignificant. With whatever their activity, so they might repeat the relation in the future, so that the correlation might be certain from them ahead. The power pretends to be finite, and finite the possession they wanted, their will being pursued in whatever repeated present moment.
Doldrums, eviler than the devil. Boredom makes men to villains, and the water goes quick, lad. Vanished.
The naked eye sees the same as the telescope or microscope. The ear is the same as the telephone or microphone. Thus also all the instruments that register, with the perception of their intelligence, the sign of minimal relation drawn near by multiplied proximity. They grasp no more. Isaiah would say about modern science, they have microscopes but do not see. They have microphones but do not hear. This man of society, who in contrast to the natural man is weaker to the degree that he no longer must face any of the dangers the latter had to overcome, that is, precisely as weak as he who is incapable of overcoming even the slightest danger, and who has no other activity, no larger sphere of action, because his interests go no further than his own life's need. This nearly inorganic will to live, this man, nevertheless, enjoys in exchange for his tiny learned task and his submission the security of all the human ingenuity has accumulated in society, what he would not otherwise obtain except by individual superiority, the potency of persuasion. Igor Severanin.
Игорь Северянин в группе девушек нервных, в остром обществе дамском. Я трагедию жизни претворю в игре за фарс. Ананасы в шампанском, ананасы в шампанском. Из Москвы в Нагасаки, из Нью-Йорка на Марс.
Ananansky Chapansky, my friends. There's not much with Igor in this text, but it is very important to remember that Igor actually had quite an influence on the Russian futuristic side. Influence on Mayakovsky. So, absolutely an influence when it comes to Russian poetry. For more background history, I do recommend checking out my video on Russian futurism. I do talk about egofuturism. And why in particular egofuturism, you say? What differs that from the Russian futurist, Cubist futurist, and yes, any other futurist, even Marianetti? What differs? Well, the following words. I am Igor Severanin, a genius.
Ананасы в шампанском, ананасы в шампанском. Удивительно вкусно, искристо, остро. Весь я в чем-то норвежском, весь я в чем-то испанском. Вдохновляюсь порывно и берусь за перо.
Let's read some of his poetry. The Ladies' Club, written in 1912. In my comfortable carriage, buoyed by its elliptic bearings, I love to visit at golden midday the Ladies' Club for tea time, where women so deliciously gossip about social trash and quarrels, where the foolish rightfully are unfoolish, the wise always stupid. Oh, all you fashionable subjects, from you my sorrow will unfurl. Trembling lips with irony quivers like jelly made of wild strawberries. The natives look just like pineapples, and pineapples resembling natives. The choral woman's quips are witty, recording her exotic landscapes. The mayor's wife begins yawning, leaning over the silent piano, looks out the window where fermenting July sensuously stumbles. Around us fan the golden cobwebs of spleen's lacy tribes, a symbol. Have thus compared myself. Isn't this why I love the Ladies' Club?
Ананасы в шампанском, ананасы в шампанском.
Qin Shi. In popular culture, people call him the creator of Juche. But it is more complicated than that. He was part of a larger movement of creating the mythos of the Korean. Jin is born in 1880, became more active around 1908, where sort of a cascading effect started to happen. It was part of them creating this sort of Korean national identities, which was quite lacking, and even in his earlier writings he was formulating that Manchus and Koreans are related, because a Korean at this time wasn't, well, independent from the larger powers, Manchus being Qing and even the Japanese in a sense, where a lot of Korea was semi-slavery system, very, not a great system to say the least. But this was part of then creating this sort of, now what are we, proper strength, proper sort of ethnic concepts of a Korean. So a lot of this also goes back to the individual, like the anarchistic personalism. Again, personalism is a big thing within anarchism, of the individual Korean in his relation to other Koreans. And this is why a lot of his writing, while not directly Juche, and the ethno-nationalism of Juche was taken by the North, and even the South in a sense has a form of ethno-nationalism. And in particular then, the individual and the human struggle. Your duty, your struggle, your idea of being a Korean, which came into then, if we take the Juche concept, where a big thing with Juche is also the pushing up of the individual with the Song family, making them sort of superhuman. They are better than everybody else. They are, superhumans. The personalism's perfect being, the anarchistic perfect being, is the Kim Il-sung. He didn't spend much time in Korea in his later life, in his adulthood. He was mostly exiled to Japan, to Manchuria, to you name it, because Korea wasn't independent at this time. He wrote a text on how to do a revolution, a declaration of independence for Korea, and how it should come to be. And that's what we're going to go through today here. The Declaration of the Korean Revolution. To sustain the Korean people's survival, we need to wipe out robber Japan. The expulsion of robber Japan can only be accomplished by a revolution. But where do we begin to engage in a revolution? After the revolution of the old days, people used to be the slaves of the state, and above them, they used to be lords and masters, a privileged group dominating them. Consequentially, the so-called revolutions was nothing but an altered name of the privileged group. In other words, a revolution used to just replace one privileged group with another. Therefore, people determined their own orientation toward revolution to their understanding of which group of the new old lords, masters, was more generous, more ruthless, more virtuous, or more vicious. Eventually, as a result, people had no direct relation with the revolution. Accordingly, a slogan such as "Behead the King, consult the people" became the sole goal of the revolution. However, today's revolution is one that the masses makes for themselves. And for that reason, we call it a revolution of the masses and the direct revolution. Since it shall be direct revolution of the masses, the fermentation and expansion of their enthusiasm for it transcends any numeral compression in the revolution between the weak and the strong. The result of the revolution, whether a success or a failure, always goes beyond the ordinary meaning of warfare. The masses without money and arms defeat a monarch with thousands of soldiers and hundreds of thousands of wealth, and expel foreign invaders. The first step towards our revolution, therefore, is to demand the awakening of the masses. And then he goes into a list here of how he does it. I'll skip ahead and do the 5 points which he brings up. 1. To destroy the rule of a foreign race. Why? Since at the top of Korea resides a foreign race, Japan, a despotic country. Korea under the despotism of a foreign race is not an authentic Korea. To discover the authentic Korea, we must destroy the rule of a foreign race. 2. To destroy a privileged class. Why? Since at the top of the Korean masses sits the governor general or others who are the members of a privileged class composed of a gang of robbers who oppress the masses. The Korean masses under the oppression of the privileged class are not the free masses of Korea. To discover the free masses of Korea, we must overthrow the privileged class. 3. To destroy the system of economic expulsion. Why? since the economy of the expulsion class is not an economy organized by the masses themselves for the sake of their livelihood, but an economy organized to feed the robber. We are to destroy the system of economic expulsion and to deploy the livelihood of the masses. 4. To destroy the social inequality. Why? Since the strong exist above the weak and the high above the low. A society full of any inequalities will become one of which people exploit, usurp, hate, and detest each other. In society at first, for the happenings of the minority, damage is inflicted upon the masses. The majority, at the last, the minority inflicts damage upon each other. To promote the happiness of the masses, therefore, we should destroy social inequality. 5. To destroy servile cultural thought. Why? Are those not something produced by the strong to support the strong in the form of religion, ethics, literature, fine arts, customs, and public morals? Haven't they served the strong as various tools for its pleasure? Aren't they necrotic that enslaves the masses? While the minority class becomes strong and the majority masses end up being the weak. That the weak could not resist an unjust oppression is entirely due to the fact that they are fettered by servile cultural thought. If you do not cut off the chains of those restraints and put forward the culture of the masses, the general masses, weak in thinking of their rights and lacking their interest in advancing freedom, would just circulate through as slaves. Therefore, to advocate the culture of the masses, we must destroy servile cultural thought. The ending ends with, the masses are the supreme headquarters of our revolution. Violence is our only weapon for our revolution. We must go to the masses and go in hand with the masses. With ceaseless violence, assassinations, destructions, and rebellion, we shall overthrow the rule of robber Japan. Transform all the absurd systems in our life and construct an ideal Korea, in which one human being will not be able to oppress the other being and one society will not be able to exploit other societies. That is the will of Jin Sheho. Godspeed. Tristan Tzara. Why am I doing this to myself? I really picked all the most complicated ones in one video, it seems to be. Tristan is massive. We covered before in other videos, if you do want to check all of them out, about the history of surrealism and futurism. Tristan was part of a lot of this. He became active around 1912, around the era of Cubism, and after World War I, met up with a lot of surrealists, for example Breton, but more or less started to create his own little moving away from the more surrealist parts of the avant-garde and formed something very different. He created a lot of different concepts, but one of the most famous one is Dadaism. And just to make it simpler on ourselves, let's just explore Dadaism and sort of skip most of the other things.
Lahore, Egiga Korab, Ihu Bloiko, Rusula Huyu, Holaka Holala, Alaku Boom, Blaku Boom, Blaku Boom, Posso Pataka, Kusukurusukurukurukuruku, Asabatusa, Dababaumpa, Kusakova.
Not per se created it, but was part of the formation of Dadaism, let's just state instead. And what is Dadaism then? Well, you've seen it around quite a lot. It is, how should I say it, anti-art. Oh, you know, if I am to try to give you an explanation in a proper and fashionable manner, I go... But properly, what is then Dada? Dada isn't anything in and of itself, but just what you describe something. I think that's the best I can do and explain. So there are two overall examples. I can explain to you one of the very famous ones, which is this one. You say what it is. Well, it is something that pissed a lot of people off. They showed this And they went, this is art. And everybody, wait, how is this art? And says, well, this is art. Why is it art? Because the artist said it's art. Why would it not be art? So it's a dumbing down of the concept of, for example, objective beauty, art as a high cultural art form, discussion of human senses, aesthetical critiques. It's sort of I can say, the earlier postmodern concepts of deconstruction, but in art. And again, this pissed people off because it's a mockery of something that is beautiful. It's a pissoir. It's sweet piss. There's nothing to this. But the artist described it in such a way that it made it so that people have to see it as art. It isn't art. I just said it's art, but it isn't art. That's the deconstruction of art. This is something I faced also back in my own art lifestyle. I think I've covered it once before, but I frame it again as a task was given to create anything, but with paper cutouts in the form of Dadaism. Dadaism usually have paper cutouts as a way in their art. It doesn't have to be, but it usually took its form in that way. So find things in different newspapers and different magazines, cut them up, glue them onto a paper, and then present it. And I did that. I just found cute seals and some random garbage. I didn't really have a thought behind it. I just found cute seals and just called it cute seals being cute. It's no overarching meaning, no overarching point to it. I just found cute seals and posted it on a blank piece of paper. I asked the audience what they thought, and the audience started to describe these overarching aesthetical meanings to it of the beauty and the aesthetics and seals and the animal and cruelty and the coloring and you name it. And I was just, this is nothing. This is me finding cute seals, posting it on a blank piece of paper or gluing it on a blank piece of paper. But yet, because someone said this is art, therefore people start describing it as art, even though it isn't. And this is what that is missing. Again, a lot of the postmodern art of the banana glued onto a wall, it's the same thing. It's, oh, this is art, because I say so. And then people, sort of the bourgeois goes up and says, oh yeah, it is. So Dadaism became high cultural bourgeois that they were criticizing, because Dadaism usually has a form of communism in it and sort of disliking of the high culture of the West. But they became it. They became the high culture. The Dadaism, the critique, just became what they were critiquing. This pissoir, the cute seals being cute. This pissoir. It doesn't have any meaning to it. That is so deep. That's so deep. I will now make you emperor of this kingdom, and you can now abuse the poor people of the kingdom. Congratulations. It just replaced. And this is why a lot of people have critique of modern art, and it came from this. Because modern art is useless garbage. It doesn't talk about aesthetic beauty. It is art for the sake of being art. Anyways, toodaloo. Viktor Frankl.
This is Dr. Viktor Frankl, professor of psychiatry and neurology at the University of Vienna.
And I kind of noticed that it's a bit in the wrong order. We're going to talk about Alfred Adler later, and logotherapy, which is what Viktor Frankl talks about, has inspiration from Alfred Adler. But we'll talk about that later.
Tell me, doctor, what would have happened if you had died first and your wife would have had to survive?
Had to survive, right.
Thereupon he said, oh, how this would have been terrible, how she had suffered. Thereupon I retorted, well, this suffering, doctor, your wife has been spared this suffering, and it was you who could spare her this suffering. But now, as it were, you have to pay for it. You are billed for it. By the fact that now you have to mourn, you have to suffer, you have to survive her. This man looked me up, and then he stood up, gave me his hand and silently left my office. He found consolation in this reversal of attitude toward a fate which could no longer be changed. I could not revive his wife, you understand?
Right.
But I
right.
could change his attitude. Suddenly he saw a meaning, the meaning of a sacrifice. At the same moment, there was no depression any longer. He could overcome this depression. It remained still suffering, but it was suffering for the sake of someone.
And that is a summary, more or less, of logotherapy. Change the meaning and change the word. You can find suffering in every concept, no matter what you do. In this case, a dead wife. He says it's suffering to live without it, but then change it. So what do you mean? Then change it, make it the opposite. Change the meaning of your suffering. But then she lived a great life. So your suffering shouldn't be seen as suffering because you have given something to someone else. I kind of really like it in certain aspects. It's just changing a meaning of something to reframe. Now there's obviously another aspect to this text here we need to talk about. If I can mention this on YouTube, he's a survivor. Now the question becomes like, is this relevant? Well, he makes it relevant. To give a bit of an understanding, he makes it very relevant. It's a big chunk of his work is his experience. And this is from his most famous book, Man's Search for Meaning. He starts it by more or less pointing out that this is his personal experiences. And then, in a sense, the more existential feelings a person have dealing with this type of experience. From page 13, with the progressive dawn, the outlines of the men's camp became visible. Long stretches of several rows of barbed wire fences, watchtowers, searchlights, and the long column of ragged human figures. Grey in the greyness of dawn, trekking along the straight, desolate roads. That what destination we do not know. They were isolated shouts and whistles of command. We did not know their meaning. My imagination led me to seek gallows, with people dangling on them. I was horrified, but this was just as well, because step by step we had become accustomed to a terrible and immense horror. And then later on he starts his basic concept of logotherapy with readers of my short autobiographical story usually ask for a fuller and more direct explanation of my therapeutic doctrine. Let me explain why I have employed the term logotherapy. Logos is a Greek word that denotes meaning. Logotherapy, or as it has been called by some authors, the Third Viennese School of Psychotherapy, focuses on the meaning of human existence, as well on man's search for such a meaning. According to logotherapy, the striving to find a meaning in one's life is a primary motivation force in a man. That is why I speak of will to meaning in contrast to the pleasure principle, or, as we could also term it, the will to pleasure, on which Freudian psychoanalysis is centered, or as well in contrast to the will to power stressed by Adlerian psychology. And Adlerian will cover Adler later. A human being is not one thing among others. Things determine each other, but man is ultimately self-determining. What he becomes within the limits of endowment and environment, he has made out of himself. In the camps, for example, in this living laboratory, and on this testing ground, we watched and witnessed some of our comrades behave like swine, while others behave like saints. Man has both potentialities within himself, which one is actualized depending on the decision, but not on conditions. Hakim Bey, or his actual name, Peter Lamborn Wilson. I looked at him, I looked at the type of art on his books, and I went, is this Robert Anton Wilson? And then I looked on the Google thing and says, people also search Robert Anton Wilson. It's like, God damn it, this is a trap. Oh, no. And then I look into his inspiration, Said Hussein Nassar. Oh, you got to be cheating me. And then I keep looking. And it says, following the Iranian Revolution in 1979, Wilson lived in New York City and shared a browntown townhouse with William Burroughs. You have to be joking me. So yeah, no, this touches on a lot of things I've mentioned before. And what he wrote about mostly is something called Temporary Autonomous Zones, TAS. As I accidentally recorded 10 minutes without clicking the record button, I'll go into this. TAS is a chaotic form of anarchism. It is this part of this LSD movement that was very common back in the day, of destroy the system any means necessary in the most grotesque way necessary. Walk into Citibank or Chembank computer customer service area during busy period. Take your shit on the floor and leave. There's also a lot of child P, which, yeah, this guy's definitely a pedo. For example, pays up in public place with siren flyers, photos of beautiful 12-year-old boys naked and masturbating, clearly titled The Face of God. And I mean, there's a lot of this. If you ever read Prometheus Rising, you have not read Prometheus Rising, I will make a video on it. I'm working on it. If you're watching this at this point and you want me to do something about Wilson, I mean, write it in the comments. I do want to make something big, but I also do want to make that a lot of IRL inspired and filming, which will not be easy. Yeah, there's a lot of William. Okay. So this dude, Wilhelm Reich, was driven half mad and killed by agent of an emotional plague. This dude is, when you watch my stuff and the stuff I've talked about and other people, with a lot of drugs. I personally take no drugs. Is it a lot of LSD and drugs? The deadly organ rays. Think about that. I don't like this. Any reading of this type of art, again, the LSD 70s, is always a doozy, but it's always weird. We have seen the ghost of Rene Geunon, chadderist and topped with a fez, like Boris Karloff as Arden Bey in The Mummy, leading a funeral, no wave, industrial noise, rock band in loud, buzzing black fly chants for the death of culture and cosmos, the elitist fetishism of pathetic nihilists, the Gnostic self-diagnose of post-sexual Dodis, Intellistudis, Intellistudis. Okay, I have no clue. I don't speak English no more. He made a statement. You do not get into this full-heartedly. You cover a lot of things, surface level, and dip a little bit. Dip in every concept in surface. Because if you ever go into something too deep, you lose your mind. And he brings auteur into this. He brings everything I've covered before. Like, again, this is sort of the Gnostic level nonsense of I know everybody, but I don't want to understand anyone in a deeper level. I must go deep, and then bring all of that into one line of thought without it making any sense. I recorded another 5 minutes of me ranting, but I think you have enough. If you ask me what this is about, Luddite. He's a Luddite. It's nothing here. Take care. Bye. John Surson. Now, this actually has some interesting books, but we will be monkey maxing. Monkey.
About this, in my own experience, I was driving around in the Bay Area with a friend of mine in California back in the 90s, don't remember what year, and he told me this term, futur primitif, the French, future primitive, and man, I immediately stole that. It just seems so apt a term, future primitive, and then that started to be a little more current, and now it's just primitivist. Of course, it means anarchist primitivist, but and the simple idea is, if the future isn't somehow primitive, there ain't going to be a future.
This more or less sums it up, but we're going to cover this book, Future Primitive, and the other essays. I want a quick little thing about the publication here. It's published by Autonomedia, which is a non-profit publisher in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, mostly focusing on anarchistic books. The thing is, they also publish Peter Lambert Wilson and his book, Temporary Autonomous Zones, that we just covered. So, everybody's kind of related. I don't understand. Also, just a quick summary before we go into the book. This is a left-wing primitivism. in the sense of Theodor Kaczynski, in one sense, the center primitivist, and then you have Linkola as the right wing. This is just left-wing primitivism focusing on left-wing values, but then the same thing as Kaczynski and Linkola. This is a certain comparison to Noam Chomsky, because Noam Chomsky is sort of an anarcho-communist, but he's just an anarcho-primitivist. That form of left-wing anarchism. And by this point, you should know that Chomsky is a hack, and so most of these people. But okay, this is really boring. Like, in comparison to the other one, which was just LSD-filled dribble, this writes like a academic paper with Harvard references. So it's like, everything is just reference. Like, he's just relating to something. Like, postmodernism says to us that a society without power relates can only be abstraction. Foucault, 1982. That is a lie unless we accept the death of nature. We knew what once was in what we can find again. Turnbull spoke of intimacy between Mobati people and the forest, dancing almost as if making love to the forest. In the bosom of a life of equal, that is no abstraction, the struggle to endure, they were dancing with the forest, dancing with moon. Marx predicted erroneously that a deepening material immunization would lead to revolt and to capital downfall. Might it not be to an increased psychic suffering? Is itself leading to the reopening of revolt indeed? That this may be the last hope of resistance. And yet it is obviously that mere suffering is no guarantee of anything. The side does not want revolution. It is revolutionary in its own right, as Deleuze and Guattari pointed out, while further on in Anti-Epidus, remembering fascism, noting that people have desires against their own interest, and the tolerance of humanity in enslavement remains widespread. For Freud and his Wagnerian theory of warring instincts and abstraction division of the self into id, ego, and superego, the passion of the individual were primordial and dangerous. The work of civilization was to check and harness them. The whole edifice of psychoanalysis, Freud said, is based upon the theory of necessary repression. Domination is obviously assisted by this view. The human culture is established only by means of suffering. That consistent renunciation of desire is inevitable for continuation of civilization. Their work is sustained by the energy of stifled love, all that is required by natural aggression of human nature, the latter of eternal, universal fact, of course. Adorno, oh my lord! He keeps quoting every little hack left-winger. Deleuze, Guattari, Deleuze, Adorno, Foucault. My issue with texts like this, there's no original thought. No wonder Kaczynski criticized this man. There's no original thought here. I suggest that one of the biggest mistakes modern American revolutionaries make in that, in the name of tolerance, they let anyone and everyone of a vaguely rebellious disposition join their movement. The result is that they got diluted or even swamped by large numbers of make-believe revolutionaries, of whom rebellion is only a game. Even if it sounds intolerant, revolutionaries must form a movement that excludes to the extent that it incorporates none but real revolutionaries. Only in this way can the movement have cohesion and the capacity of vigorous action. Alfred Adler, born 1817 in Vienna, Austro-Hungary. I do find this man a little bit more interesting. Adler created a lot of bases on different psychoanalysis that later on was used by multiple other people, but one of the more famous concepts he created is inferiority complex. And it's based upon his childhood. It goes quite in a lot of details on what happened very early on. He's one of 7 children from an Austrian Jewish couple. His younger brother died next to him when he was 3 years old. He got pneumonia. He got rickets, he got multiple other sicknesses, saw a lot of trauma. A doctor told his father that he's going to die, he's a lost cause. Don't care about him anymore. So a lot of this is their relations to family, but relation to state, relation to society, your rituals, your standing, your view of yourself in relation to others. So this is why the will of power in Nietzschean concept comes along, because will of power still argues about your role in society and how you can push yourself above that, which obviously is the perfect part of one individual to do, but not every individual will do that. Barely anyone will do that. So it's still your relation to social orders of things. So he goes in a lot of his talks about, how do you yourself in this situation? What was your relation? How was your early childhood? Who did you look up to? Who didn't like you? Like, for example, he looked up to his father, but felt lesser than his mother through relation to his father, because his mother always goes above him. So he could never, will of power himself above his mother. He's still in the relationship, social relationship and family of his mother. He can't replace a mother, for example. If you talk about inferiority complex, for example, is feeling inadequate. It's not, I cannot fit the role that I'm given. I can't reach just the basic part of the role that I'm given in society or in family relations or in relationships. I'm inadequate. I am not good enough, and I will never be good enough. And one of the solutions that Alec came up to fix some of these problems is to create a new structural relationship. For example, by creating a new type of environment where your inadequacies can then, you can work on it. You can within a different frame. Let's say having a simulation that you can then work upon, fix the part that makes you inadequate. In a larger society, you can then fit in much simpler. For example, if you talk politics, one of the things that is talked about quite a lot, at least here in Sweden, is the idea of youth clubs. And that is creating a new type of environment where certain asocial behaviors can be fixed by then having a guardian and then meeting people your own age where you can fit into a group. And if you can fit in within that group, you can fit in larger society. It will fix asocial behavior, fix criminality, it will fix other problems. The main concern here, and what I disagree, a simulation isn't real life, and it will never be real life. Making you feel enough in certain ways, for example, your small little friend group, it doesn't make you feel enough in society as a whole. Your 10 friends being the popular kid between the 10 friends, the will of power between your 10 friends, doesn't make you a great person in larger society. Larger society is much more of a complex structure. But yes, of course, it is not supposed to be a fix, it's supposed to be therapy, it's supposed to help you to constantly build upon errors that you have in yourself, for example, a relationship between your parents or other structures. You can't change, if we go back to the other psychoanalyst, you can't change the wording around the logos. You can't say, that's meaningful. You can't. The structure is so complex, you have to work within the structure. You have to push yourself to work on the structure. I'm going to cover Carl Maria Wilgut and Otto Rahn at the same time, making it a little bit easier on myself and also giving myself only 5 minutes to cover this because I want to get this on an hour. I wanted to show a really great video, but it has Evangelion music in the back, so I can't. But I'm just going to let the video be in the background. Meanwhile, we'll talk about these two people. With Otto Rahn in 1934, he wrote a book called Kreuzzug gegen den Gral, or Crusade Against the Grail. Carl Maria Wilgut read this book and was very inspired by it. So he passed it to Heinrich Himmler, who then also read it. Otto Rahn received a telegram from Himmler in 1933 saying this is very interesting. Then Otto Rahn joined Himmler's staff and then later fully joined the SS. And he didn't really care for the SS, he only cared for Himmler because Himmler showed interest. And all he wanted was to find different mythical archaeology. That's all he cared about. But then when they found out he was homosexual, which Himmler did actually know about, he just didn't care. When his homosexuality became public, he was put into a camp as a guard to toughen him up. Didn't really work, and his body was found near a ravine in Austria. They called it a suicide, but it probably wasn't. So what you've been seeing here in the background summarizes Carl Maria Wilgut mostly. Wilgut, after serving in the army, got very interesting in mysticism, mostly joining up with different Masonic orders, up until the point he joined up with Jörg Lanz von Liebensfels. And Liebensfels viewed Wilgut's mystical writings and visions that he had to be something you should base upon. Wilgut viewed himself from a line of ancient German Volk. He also got inspired by Guido von List, an idea of Ariosophy, which takes a lot of the concept of theosophy, mixing it with something else, and the idea is wisdom of the Aryans. So, from his understanding of his own German heritage, he has a view of the Aryans from a different mystical point of view. He knows, quote-unquote, the truth. And this is what he then brought onto Himmler and the SS and a lot of the works they did. A lot of Wilgut's ideas is also a replacement of Christian theology, basing the Bible, that the Bible is supposed to be a Germanic story and not of the Middle East, and that it's been misunderstood by then the deceivers, you can guess who they would be, to make it a Middle Eastern story instead of a German story, and that if you replace certain aspect of the story, it would make sense in German context. And this then can replace Christianity, and it's not just Wilgut who did this. You see this a lot with positive Christianity, for example, a replacement of the love concept with a more Germanic or Aryan-focused concept of strength, honor, and Faustian spirit in a sense. Wilgut's ideas is very popular, especially after World War II, with a romanticization of Wilgut's stories with esoteric Hitlerism, for example, and a lot of different, I wouldn't even call them, like, a lot of different groups now exist, basing themselves upon the quote-unquote Aryan story, which is still part of a theosophy story, but they're trying to revive this. It's not working. Did watch a video saying that, all neo-paganism is inspired by Wilgut. No, it isn't. Just, not even neo-pagans, just because neo-pagans has a different definition to it. But there are certain groups that like to define the Germanic storylines of the sagas and the rest as the more proper one and remove Christianity from that. I think it's quite popular right now in certain paganistic American cults, but and of course in far-right political thought, some of these stories are still, but overall from the core of Maria Blavatsky's sort of spiritual racism up until World War II, you can see a varied line there, and they're all the same types of people, and I covered most of them, but they all focus themselves on Blavatsky's ideas. But that line has kept going. There still is a line there, and I will cover them most likely in different modern stories. I have a few different stories of people basing themselves on Wilgut stories, who then have created organizations after the fact, which I will cover in other videos. I guess a teaser. I did write about this story a while ago, but I haven't covered it or made a video about it. I am in contact with the people. But theosophy, not just the Germanic version, but there's a few other, do have the racial concepts to them. For example, a lot of concepts of light versus darkness, and specifically Atlantean thought. I know, it's weird. But one of those concepts, a very small one that I've gotten myself, not into, but talking to. I have all the original papers and all the original books in my archives, but, no, maybe there's interest in it. But a light racialism of the Danes, how the Danish whites, lights, whatever, have to fight against the darks, and that Christ is an Atlantean, is a resurrected man from, for example, the general of Atlantis, and a few other concepts, and the devil is a light bringer in a positive sense, not in a negative sense. I will do a full-on documentary about it in the future. But for now, toodaloos, bye-bye, 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 bye-bye.